monthly discussion. Hello, this is December 18th. This is the Palm Springs Airport Commission regular meeting, 5:30. Welcome to all of our guests tonight. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Sam, do you want to lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag. It's stands.
Any other? Has the agenda been posted?
Yes, the agenda has been posted.
Okay, let's do roll call, please.
Banks. Here. Behrman.
Here.
Burke.
Present.
Caldwell.
Here.
Corcoran.
Present.
Delgado. Evansteiner.
Here.
Feltman. Yes. Fong. Edric.
Present.
Keel.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
McDermott.
Here.
Park.
Here.
Pye.
Here.
Sam Laska.
Here.
Wise.
Here.
Wiseman.
Here.
Young.
Here.
We have a form.
Got it. Any changes to the agenda?
Yes, we need to remove item 8B, the leasing policy.
That's being postponed to next month.
We have a motion to accept the agenda with the removal of item 8D.
So moved. Second. Roll call?
Banks.
Here.
Behrman.
Yes.
Burke.
Yes.
Caldwell.
Yes.
Corcoran.
Yes.
Evansteiner.
Yes.
Feltman. Yes. Fong.
Aye.
Edric.
Yes.
Keel.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
McDermott.
Yes.
Park.
Yes.
Pye.
Yes.
Sam Laska.
Yes.
Wise.
Yes.
Wiseman.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes. Great. Are there any public comments limited to 3 minutes? Please. Your name and
My name's Eric Menendez, and I'm from Joshua Tree Gateway Communities Alliance. I stopped in and talked to Daniel, and I think it's already out on the travel the other day in another meeting. I'm a former stakeholder, from lodging and 29 Palms, and we have, some advertising to our tourism board and everything. So I kind of was down here auditing that as well as trying to put options with base and transit, because I was noticing through auditing the tourism numbers up there, that's what I did. We have a weekly presence at Village Fest, and we're looking into doing some maybe targeted marketing because we get a lot of Canadian visitors and a lot of European visitors, and we're here for a month or so. What I'm trying to do is bring Yucca Valley, the County of San Bernardino, and 29 Palms together to hopefully explore a regional approach similar to what Pacific River Palm Springs has done. We're working on it for years, but we're getting there, and I mean, to see what you guys have going on here and learn about what the progress going on. Thank you.
awesome. Welcome. Thank you. Anybody else?
Public comments are closed.
Okay. We have to approve the minutes from September 18th and October 16th.
I have a motion to accept the September 18th, 2024 minutes. So moved.
Second.
Banks.
Yes.
Behrman.
Yes.
Burke.
Yes.
Caldwell.
Yes.
Corcoran.
Yes.
Delgado. Evansteiner.
Yes.
Feltman.
Yes.
Fong. Edric.
Yes.
Keel.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
McDermott.
Yes.
Park.
Yes.
Pye.
Yeah.
Sam Laska. Wise.
Yes.
Wiseman.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes.
Can I have a motion to accept the October 16, 2024 minutes?
Second.
Banks.
Yes.
Behrman.
Yes.
Burke.
Yes.
Caldwell.
Yes.
Corcoran.
Yes.
Evansteiner.
Yes.
Feltman.
Yes.
Fong. Edric.
Yes.
Keel.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
McDermott.
Yes.
Park.
Yes.
Pye.
Yeah.
Sam Laska.
Yes.
Wise.
Yes.
Wiseman.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes. Excellent. We have a new staff member who's joining us tonight. Victoria, would you like to introduce Lowell? Where are you? Where'd you go?
I would like to introduce Lowell. He's our newest member. He's been with us for what, three weeks now?
3 weeks this week.
Lowell is actually gonna be helping us with all of our revenue contracts. So we're gonna have a dedicated person that's gonna be able to comb through all of our black and white legal language. Also helping, Jeremy Holm is also gonna be helping Lowell through that. But more importantly, we did have a meeting earlier today where we were talking about our concessions and making sure that, you know, our concessionaires are abiding by their contracts. So Lowell's gonna be able to help with that. He's actually hit the ground running. So we're really grateful for you to be here with us. Do you want to say a few words?
It's my pleasure to be here and serving the citizens of Palm Springs. As a resident for over a year, I have vested interest in the success of the airport. So what better way to do it than as a member of the team here at the SB?
Lowell, where were you before?
I was actually an associate professor at the University of Denver. I was also assistant dean of MBA programs there. But my entree into aviation was 24 years in the aviation business. Most notably, I helped start Frontier Airlines back in 1994.
We welcome them back.
Thank you. Yeah, you all are totally welcome. We also have straighter. Yeah.
Welcome, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
All right. Our next agenda item is, we're moving to item 8A, public-private partnerships. Victoria's gonna drive this, but just some context here. Many of us, about, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a presentation made to our commission from the folks at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam and also a VC firm out of Orange County, just kind of getting us smart about the possibility of public-private partnerships. One of the reasons why this is important is because this could be the funding option or a funding option as we look to execute our long-term plan. So I was thrilled to see this jump on the agenda, and I'll hand it over to you, Victoria. You're driving?
Actually, I'm driving. But thank you for making that introduction.
Why is Victoria's here? Not here? Go for it.
So yeah, to the chair's point, we wanted to educate the commission and provide some awareness around at least one tool that we could potentially use to fund projects for the airport. So here with us today, we have Tracy and Sloan from the law firm of Kaplan Kirsch and Rockwell to the left of the room, as well as Isla from Frasca, who's our on-call financial consultant. And I'll let Tracy start, or whichever one you'd like to start.
Please start. So we have some slides, I'm not a presenter, but if they're in the packet, we can go that way, whatever you prefer. It should be coming up.
It's here in your packet. And it's coming.
The second one.
That's for.
The first one that's in the agenda packet. The second first.
Yeah. We blow up full screen, please. Okay, let's begin.
Do we just say when to advance?
Yeah, you
Okay,
can
so
say
go
that.
ahead, you can. So, briefly for introductions, my name is Tracy Davis. My colleague Sloan Islahard is here at my left. We are attorneys from Kaplan Kirsch in the Denver office. So thank you for Frontier, Markham County Airlines. We both operate in two of our firm's practice groups, airports and projects. And so by doing that, we both work on a lot of airport construction projects, development projects, regulatory issues. But among those are a variety of P3 projects. So what we've been asked to do and would like to do is just kind of lay a base foundation on P3 projects or public-private partnerships as a way to deliver a project on the legal side. And then I think Isol's going to talk about the financial side. But we want to kind of just sort of back up and put it in context a little bit and talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of them. So that's, I think, our approach. If you have questions, obviously, please ask. We'll sort of go back and forth on some slides. So I want to go to the next one. I'll give us a start. So I do want to sort of back up a little bit and go to what is a P3 in the broader scheme of things? And generally in construction or project delivery, we talk about delivery methods and project delivery as a way to take what your project is or your group of projects, a construction program, and then complete them, design them, plan them, design them, and construct them. Those are often done in something called delivery methods, which is, I think, a group of sort of legal principles or relationships that are sort of standardized in the construction industry. So if you say you're going to design, bid, build a project, there will be a set of expectations on your contractor side and on your side for how those might work. So those are ways to bring projects to fruition, I think, overall. In my next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some different ones, just again, to sort of put in background. But as you're thinking about how you bring a project to completion, you have to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it. Can you do it yourself, or do you need help? Do you need consultants? Do you need a P3, so you have a developer who's going to do most of it for you? You need to kind of look at yourself, look at your organization, your size, your skills. You need to look at your finances, whether you can pay for it yourself, or you need help, you need bonds, or a developer, for example. In association with the skill set of your staff, you have time. Maybe you have a lot going on and you don't necessarily have time to do all of the work yourself. Again, that will help inform how you decide on what your delivery method is. And then the last one is, what are your risks? Are they financial? Maybe in some cases, the speed with which you need the project done is more important than the cost. Maybe it is that you're working in an operating environment like an airport, you're in your terminal, you're on your airfield, where there are even different risks, right, than schedule or price to your project. So all of those will go into how you decide how you bring your project together. So the next slide is the sort of 5 of the major delivery methods. The one that's most typical in public entities is the design, bid, build, hard bid. There's whole lots of things. That's where you, the owner, design the project, you bid it out, lowest, usually the lowest responsive response, and then it wins, and they construct it. For a public entity, you have a lot of control over your project, but it takes a long time, and you do have all the risk for, say, design errors, because you're going to own the design. On the other hand, again, as a public entity where wisely spending money is important, you're going to mostly award that to the lowest bidder, so the lowest price wins. So that's why it's often popular in government. The next one's increasingly, as you go towards the bottom, reduce the amount of owner control, reduce the amount of owner risk, give more responsibility to the contractor, or risk to the contractor, but the way that those go together, they do reduce your control. So the construction manager at risk, the owner still has design control, but you hire a contractor earlier. This is gaining, is becoming really popular in public projects as the federal government, federal funders become more accepting of alternative delivery. And the reason for that is by hiring your contractor early, they can help you fix design problems before you start building. There are some issues with procurement, right? Because you may not have a fixed price for construction. As a public entity, that sometimes can be difficult, but it is a way to start to reduce the owner's risk. Same thing with the 2 design builds that are on here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time digging into the nuances of design build, but most generally, you, the owner, hire one contractor to both design and build your project. Tends to be a faster delivery method. In the progressive design build, you don't have a price until after design. So again, a little different for a public entity that is used to having a price up front and knowing what you're going to spend when you enter a contract. But again, they have a lot of benefits for the owner, right? If you're hiring the contractor to both design and build, they're now responsible for design errors. So if they get in there and can't build a room because the walls aren't square, that's their responsibility generally to go fix, rather than it coming back to you as an owner. The associated risk for you, the owner, you lose some design control. Right? Once you turn over all of that power, they might be deciding what color the walls are. Last one on here is public-private partnerships. And I put that at the bottom because it captures a lot of the benefits of design build. The public-private partnership, generally, in these projects, you're going to hire a contractor to design, build, finance, and then often operate and maintain your facility. So it combines some of the benefits of design build, but then you have the other parts of that. You have the finance, where they might bring money to the project instead of you paying for it. And then they're gonna operate and maintain the facility for some period of years. So as you go through there, you sort of see how the owner's relationship to the project changes. And so as we talk about P3s a little bit more today, you have to remember that in this process, you are exchanging your control over certain aspects of the project for money. And for their skill set and their knowledge and their ability, this developer's ability to operate and manage and complete your project. But there are certainly benefits to those that is a delivery method under the right circumstances. So that's what we're gonna talk about that last one today.
All right, so, to build on the delivery methods that Tracy was talking about, I just want to talk about the slide says levels of private entity responsibility. Basically, there's a spectrum when it comes to public-private partnerships. So there's really no one definition of what a public-private partnership is. It can take many forms. So a nice way to think about it is to kind of look at this image of the level of like public ownership and sort of taking control of the project, working your way up to having a private entity take over more and more control of the project. So at the bottom, you've got some things that you probably already have at your airport with private entities, so service contracts, sales of services or products, advisory services. You have your financial advisors here, that they're private entities, they're performing a service for a public entity. Those are all very common. That would technically, in some cases, could be considered a kind of public-private partnership. But we're going to be talking about more today are the top three, where the private party takes on a larger role in what's traditionally more of a public function. So maybe developing the airport itself, financing the airport itself, managing things that typically the government entity would manage. So some example, and then at the very top of that example would be full privatization of an airport, which in the United States is extremely rare. I think it's only 2% of airports that have been privatized in the United States. Internationally, it's about 20%, but very different regulatory structures. And our understanding is that you all are not only fully privatized your airport, but you're interested in finding out sort of what are these in-between tools in which private entities can maybe infuse some revenue into your airport, and maybe take over some of these management and development responsibilities so that that can take some of that off your plate and leave room for you to focus then on other projects. So we can go to the next slide. So some features of the P3, as we've been discussing, it's the idea, it is a true partnership. That's really the first thing that you want to focus on. It's a collaboration between a public owner and a private entity to deliver a public service, facility, or both. And that's really what we want to be talking about today, is the types of partnerships that you could form around your airport. Maybe in some cases, these are terminals or concourses. Another example and projects we worked on quite a bit recently have been consolidated rental car facilities and facilities that serve those. In those cases, the private entity is responsible for all or part of design, construction, financing, operating, and maintaining the facility. And then, they're repaid, they get their financing paid back through the user fees. So rather than the public entity putting in bond money or tax money or airline money upfront, it's going to be the private entity putting it in upfront, and then they'll get paid back through customer facility charges. In the case of rental car companies, which are somewhat can be modeled in a way that investors enjoy and like having a little predictability with. Maybe it'll be through concession fees if it's a terminal. There's different ways to structure it, and private investors are becoming more familiar with these models, so they'll have their own ideas of what works for them. Unfortunately, Goldman Sachs doesn't just give us money; they like to know if they're going to get it back. So making sure whatever the deal is, it pencils is going to be very important for them. It's also going to be very important for you to know what you're getting out of the deal. So that's great if Goldman Sachs likes the deal, but you want the airport community to benefit as much or if not more than that private entity. All right, let's go to. Oh, and then one thing to say about California law. In California law, the Public Infrastructure Act limits these types of arrangements to 35 years. So you'll need to look at the financing for the deal and the legal contract term being within that 35-year period. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so why even look at putting a P3? And we have a number of blocks you can look at here, and you're going to keep these slides. Feel free to, think through sort of the ones that resonate the most with you. But the ones that we tend to hear about from our clients who are considering P3s, who end up developing successful P3s, are they like the idea of financial flexibility. They like the innovation that a private party brings. They enjoy being able to allocate more of the risk off of their table onto the private entity. And then on an ongoing basis, I think really one of the biggest appeals is that not only are you taking this maybe off the airport's balance sheet in terms of finances, but you're also taking it off the administrative responsibilities. Your staff has maybe a little bit less that it has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then the financing that you would be putting in up front, maybe through a bond issue or something like that, you still can use that resource for something else. So it creates a little bit more room and a little more flexibility within your capital program. But it's going to be really unique to each airport. So what appeals to you all is going to be the same as what appeals to, say, a LaGuardia when they were doing their new terminals, or to a New Haven that was doing their new terminals. It's going to really be unique to each airport and each community. I'm not leaving anything out here. So these are some of the drivers. And then Tracy's going to talk about a few other considerations in the next slide.
So, I only want to hit a couple things, because Sloan mentioned finance. I want to talk briefly about schedule. I do think it is important to go into a P3 with some sense of things to consider with regard to the time of the project. P3s have a reputation for, in some ways, being fast, because the developer will design and build your project and can start building before design's done. Same benefit as design, build, delivery method. But you have to think a little bit more broadly if you're thinking about developing the schedule for your project, because you need to plan it, right? You need to work with your advisors to make sure the finances work. You have a plan for how you want to develop it. You have an idea for how it fits into your overall program. Then you're going to need your advisors to help draft the agreements, or you're going to need to do the procurements. You're going to need to negotiate if you need to negotiate, to enter into the contracts, and then they will be able to start all of their design work or any environmental work or anything else you're assigning to the developer. So it's definitely not unlike other construction projects. It's not something where you sign a contract and you feel like you see action on the ground very quickly. It definitely feels like it takes longer, and it can take longer. They're also procured a little differently in that they tend to be procured in a two-step process, where you do a request for qualifications. You get qualifications from the industry. They'll send you information about their teams, who their financing are, who their people are. You'll weed that down to a couple of preferred and issue a request for proposals. And then you'll go through that process again with more detail before you select a developer. Again, that's a little longer than most procurements for a typical construction project that might have only one of those stages. Now you can shorten that. You can just do a request for qualifications or just do a request for proposals. We'd have to look at your governing documents, see if that's all right, state law, like it is here. But there are ways to increase flexibility, but you do have to account for all of this extra time that you might be not used to in your other construction projects. The other one I want to talk about briefly is delegating capacity and the need for control. I think one of the reasons to look back at that original slide about delivery methods is to, again, think about control. Some institutions, it's not a person, it's your institution is used to having control over its projects. And in a P3, where you are for 30 years, 35 years, giving up much control over your facility, as an institution, you have to be ready to do that. Meaning you have to be willing to say, here are your design specifications. After that they're in charge of the design. Right, so if you didn't specify the wall as green, they can make any color for the wall. Same thing with operations and maintenance, right? The developer is gonna be in control of your facility, operating and maintaining it. Now, of course, you'll set standards for that. You'll have people who will need to make sure they're living up to their standards. But it is different for a public entity when they're used to controlling more of what's happening on their campus. You will, sort of have to make sure internally that you are ready to handle that change. Likewise, to sort of mention the operations and maintenance requirements there. Again, if you're gonna assign them operations and maintenance, you're gonna need to figure out in advance, to be part of your planning process, what standards do you wanna hold them to during operations and maintenance? You have cleaning standards that you use for the rest of the airport, maybe you want them to follow that. Do you have certain routine maintenance you want them to do? Do you have a level of maintenance you want them to keep? So there's a lot more of the early thinking that goes into planning a P3 than might go into sort of the planning of a construction project, where you're gonna have it at the end, it can implement your typical processes already. So just things to think about as you're considering, do we want to do a P3? And if so, what facility do we want to do it with? Terminal, parking, Conrad, you know, there's a lot of airport options, but they all have different considerations. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about finances. Gisla's here, so I'm going to let her do the hard lifting here. I'll let her talk more about value for money. I think that's an analysis of the cost and the benefits of the project from a financial perspective. And for the most part, a lot of that comes from your financial professionals, but as lawyers, I think it's also important because it helps us draft a contract for you that is protective of you and gets you what you need. So definitely the financial analysis is important to us as well. Developer revenue. So you'll hear us say this again a few times. This is not free money. The developers want to make money. They have to pay back their bondholders. They have to pay back their investors, wherever they need, and they need to make a profit, or they want to make a profit. So they will be looking for revenue to do that. And you will be asked to either relinquish revenue in the form of revenue that you might otherwise have gotten. So let's say parking, right? You would take in, if you ran the parking, you would take in the parking revenue. If you were to contract with a P3 developer, they would take in the parking revenue. So you've lost that, but they've gotten it and they're maintaining it. You have to think through what revenue do you have that would be tied to the facility and how would you allow them to have that? The other option, less so in airports, and of course, California's Finance Act typically requires some sort of fee to be tied to the facility, but you do see often in roads in some airports, availability payments. That's a facility that is paid for by the public entity. So the, let's say you do a terminal as a P3, and instead of letting them collect airline rents, the airport agrees to pay a certain amount every month to them in order to operate the facility. I think that's less likely in an airport facility that generates revenue, but LAX's people mover probably is availability payments. The airport is paying the developer to operate and maintain and finance and run the people mover. Certainly an option, and sometimes you see those combined in some facilities. Quickly, I want to hit just a couple of things and then keep moving. Cost to the owner. In addition to this not being free money, there are costs to you, the owner. If you do a P3, among other things, you still have to manage the project. It may or may not take as much as managing other projects that you do, but you need to make sure it's designed right, it's constructed right, payments are made as they're supposed to be made. Then during the operations and maintenance phase, you're going to want to make sure they're operating and maintaining it. So you can't turn the key and walk away and let them do their thing without keeping an eye. Likewise, you're going to want to make sure at the end of the project, because they do end, when you get the facility back, the contract will provide that you get the facility back at the end, that you are ready to take the project back, the hand back of the facility. Again, that goes into the maintenance, for example, right? You want them to be maintained for 35 years, so when you get it back, it's in good shape. Again, all things to kind of think about as you're thinking about facilities. And then I have to say risks of termination, I worked on a P3 that terminated early. And you do need to think about it. Is it not likely? Yes, most of them do not terminate early. But there is always a risk, and it's important to, as you're looking at your contracts, thinking about you, the owner of risk, think about what happens. What's your plan B if you have to terminate the P3 early, or your developer does, which happened in Maryland. So I don't want to, belabor that, but I do think it's important to make sure that you have in the back of your mind that things do happen.
Okay, so let's talk about some examples of P3s that we can look to. Then, in the P3 world, examples are often pointed to, people love precedents to be able to point to. And it's good to be familiar with sort of what's out there and what your options are in terms of, and airports, we typically think of them for terminals, for land size, so parking and consolidated rental car companies. And then to some extent, transportation, although there's not a lot of, I think LA is the only airport that did a privatized people mover recently, or is in the process of doing that. But on the terminal side, some good examples recently in terms of full privatization with FAA's AIPP program. There's some articles recently about Avon Park, which is an airport in Florida. Outside of the FAA program, which is what you would be thinking about, interesting example that we worked on in 2022 is New Haven privatized its airport. They had a longtime airport management company, Avports, who they entered into a lease and concession agreement with. Avports is investing $100 million into build a new updated terminal in New Haven. And they'll be getting the concession fees and user fees for that terminal. They also extended the runway. And then there's a separate management agreement with another entity connected to Avport. So it's outside of the FAA's program. It's still privatized. And New Haven is a smaller airport. They didn't have a ton of staff to manage a project like this. So having a private entity come over and take over the day-to-day tasks and handle the development work was hugely useful to them. And partly as a result of that deal and partly in connection with that deal, they've expanded their air service. So they have Breeze is either beginning or has begun service, and Avello began service at New Haven. So that's been a really nice deal with that airport. And then looking at much larger airports, I don't know if anyone's been to LaGuardia lately, but they look a lot different than they did back in the day. And that is thanks to a very successful P3 deal that focused on not just one, but 2 terminals, or 3 terminals. I think they consolidated 2 terminals. And it was with more than one party. So Delta was part of that deal. They're going to be managing, consolidating 2 of the terminals. And then I cannot remember the name of the other partner, but then there's a separate deal with that partner. I think that's also a 35-year agreement. So same timeline we would have in California. And that really came out beautifully. It was, an expensive project, but I think anyone who's visited, I'm not saying you should spend that money, on your airport, but it's a great example of, maybe within a different budget, things that you can do with a private partner. And then in the Conrac world, Reno has a new contract that's being constructed. LAX is finishing up their contract, or has finished their contract, and is now building a people mover to extend to it. And Sacramento recently issued an RFQ for a new public-private partnership for their contract, and is waiting for responses to that RFQ. It'll then go into an RFP phase, and should result in an interesting deal there, which is another California neighbor. And contracts are really nice. Contracts and parking garages, because they can have really well-modeled user fees, can be a really nice sort of separate piece of a program that you can set up as a P3. All right, let's go to the next slide. So as you're putting your P3 together, you want to make sure you have the right team in place. And there's really 3 pieces to that. The first is your financial piece, and you have Rosca and with you today. And they will be able to speak much more to this, but I'm going to be giving you a sort of warning story of a P3 that did not go as planned. And a large part of it was, it did not, the money did not work out the way it was thought it was going to. So making sure that you're getting that value for money, that you understand the financials, that you have the right modeling, and that you trust your financial advisors is really important to these kinds of deals. And then on the legal side, airports generate revenue and they're great P3 opportunities, but they also are heavily regulated by the federal government. So making sure that whoever you hire for your legal team understands the regulatory piece in addition to the procurement piece and the financials is an important piece of that puzzle, because if the FAA decides they don't like your deal, that can be a real bitch in the process, and your private partner is not going to like that level of delay. So just keeping sure you're on top of that. And then having program managers in place. I'm sure you know this from other projects, but having someone that can kind of quarterback this for you, who understands the construction and the procurement, but also the P3 side of things is very important. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I just want to mention a few myths, and this is where I'm going to tell you the story of the deal that didn't go quite the way we would maybe have been nice to go. So we mentioned P3s are not free money or a new source of revenue. If anything, you're going to have to give up maybe a little bit of revenue so that the private entity can use that to pay back their investors. If they're not risk-free, so there might still be risk. A lot of that your lawyers will do their level best to negotiate it out, but sometimes you end up with a little bit of risk at the end of the day. At airports, the risks that come to mind for me the most are environmental. So who is holding the bag if you find PFAS? That's, you gotta figure that out up front. What happens if there's a delay? Who pays for contractor costs? Those are things that a savvy private investor is going to try to negotiate. You want to just be sure you're ready and that you know what you're willing to carry and what you're not. As Tracy has mentioned, every phase matters. Design matters, construction matters, operations matters too. Yes, you're handing it off, but not completely, and it's still a public service. So at the end of the day, you are the sponsor of the airport, and you are still responsible for what happens here, not just to the FAA, but also to your public. So there are political implications with these deals, and the public will know what's happening, and they will care what happens to the airport. And finally, P3s aren't right for every project. So it's an analysis. Your financial advisors, your legal advisors, your program managers are going to be honest with you if they don't think it's the right fit. You should know all the risks up front, and then be willing to carry those. I'll give you the sad tale of the Chicago parking meter contract. I don't know if any of you are from Chicago, but I am. And so the Chicago parking meter deal has become sort of like this dragon tale in the P3 world. It was entered into right before Mayor Daley left office. The city received $1.5 billion upfront from the private entity in exchange for handing the private entity the management control of all of the city's parking meters. It is a 75-year deal. The private entity made that money back in the first 15 years plus 500 million, and they have got 60 years left on the deal. So, that piece of it, I think that the city of Chicago, everyone in the city of Chicago felt a little bit cheated on that. But then also parking costs went up, parking meters were put in places that weren't very, as people from Chicago can be a little bit loud when we're unhappy. So there were political costs. So I like giving that example. I don't love that, I live in the city where it happened, but be aware that these don't always work out the way that we want them to. So knowing that you have the best deal and that you'll be able to sell that to your public and that you'll be able to explain it to yourself to you later down the road is very important. I think things have gone better since then, but that was a bad example, yeah.
Is that the one that was United Airbatt Moritz was the counterpart?
Yes, yeah. And I will say too, and this is something that you're doing now, right? You're educating yourselves, you're having these open meetings. Being transparent is really key. And that was, I think, one of the biggest lessons in the Chicago parking deal is that people did not feel it was a transparent transaction. So making sure you maintain that going forward is going to be important. All right.
So one last slide, I'm gonna hit just a couple more lessons and reminders. The top one, sort of, as we've been talking about, is there are many tools in your project delivery toolbox, and they should all work together. You wanna do all of your projects as P3s, maybe you do one as a P3 and one as something else. Again, think of your entire construction program as one, but you still have individual chunks of projects within it that all need to get delivered. And you need to look at overall your finances, your staffing, capacity to do, literally how many people do you have and do you have enough people to do the work? Probably not, most airports don't. How do you then move forward with each individual project? And then how do they fit together as a whole? One of the things I think we see with clients sometimes is that because we're so used to being in a public place, and I came in-house from the city of Denver, Sloan's from Chicago, and we're used to thinking like public entity people. But these are private, it's private money, they're private developers, they have a different motive. They have a profit motive, yes, maybe they're public minded also, but you really do have to go into this reminding yourself that this is, you're not dealing with another government here, you are dealing with a private entity, and their motivations are gonna be a little bit different. We talked about some other stuff, I think Sloan Story is a good sort of fun one on stakeholders and making sure the public and your stakeholders are involved. I think explaining a P3 can be difficult, but it certainly can be done, and education is important with stakeholders. The one I want to sort of talk the most about is that the owner, you have to consider as part of your deal, we talked a lot about what you're delegating and design, but you also have other powers that you need to consider whether you're going to delegate also. So let's say your parking lot, are you going to delegate enforcement? Something that you might normally do with your police force or the city's police force. You have the power right now to select, if you have with rental cars, your CFCs, you can control the amount of your CFCs. Some developers might want to have that power or have input on how much your customers' facility charges are. Same thing if you're gonna do a terminal as a P3. Right now, you set your rates and charges. But what if they are leasing to the airlines and you might give up power of leasing? So it's important to think about what, again, it's a control question, but it's also a stakeholder question. It's what your CPE is going to be question. Make sure that you're balancing your need to control, your need to be competitive as an airport with the developer and the money that they need from revenue and the amount of control over the facility that they're gonna have. Well, so I think those are, I think difficult for airports, but important considerations in advance. And then I just want to hit the last one because we talked about 35 years. 35 years is a long time, and the people who were negotiating the P3 deal when we negotiated are not going to be there later to enforce it, right? So you need to think through in advance your standards, make sure that you have a good contract, good financials, and everything is clear and well written so that somebody 30 years from now can enforce it, or 35 years from now can take the project back to the end of the contract. And I think thinking with that long term in mind is one of the most important parts of taking through your people. So that's our presentation. If you have questions, we're happy to talk now or later, whenever you start.
Okay. So, also I understand that Chicago, Midway also had their P3 terminated, correct?
So Midway had, and this predates when I was working with them, but my understanding is they had started the process of fully privatizing under the FAA's program, and that ended up not working out. I don't know the details of that. I think some of that had to do with the hurdles that were inherent in that FAA program, which are a little separate than like doing a discrete P3.
So my concern is the increased cost. So when you do a public-private partnership, the partnership is the one that's borrowing the $1 billion for the project. They're doing that in the taxable realm, correct?
They're using primarily private activity funds, which are issued as a conduit through a governmental entity.
But they are
But
taxes.
their debt, but they're AMT.
Okay,
So, yeah.
So
And
you're-
there's limits to how much of that you can do, so there's a lot of detail behind that, but yes, they can tap into basically the municipal market.
but they're still gonna have 25, 50 basis points penalty over what the airport could do. on their own.
Absolutely, because they're typically right above the jump bond rating.
Okay, the next question is, you've got this private entity, what are they looking, so we have $1 billion project here. Let's just say, billion for a nice round number. What type of return are they looking for? Are they looking for 10%, 20%, 25%?
Private sector.
Biggest thing, yeah.
Yeah. The majority of the deals that we've been involved in, and we're always an owner's representative working for the public entity. And typically, the private side on the deals that we've worked with is looking from anywhere from 12 to an 18% return on their equity investment. Debt is one piece, but they also have a portion that they invest, which is, their own funds, the equity piece. Typically 12 to 18% is the return they're looking for on that.
Versus,
Piece, typically pretty small piece. It's usually more debt that's financing the project than equity.
but still, they're looking for
It always costs more, always,
versus the 5,
correct,
in today's market, the 5% that the airport can issue today
yes,
for this type of facility.
that's correct.
But the trade-off often is speed, isn't
It's
it?
the speed and the other risks, and I've talked about that a bit here in the next, but yes, there are certain risks and certain benefits that you can get some of the benefits, transfer some of the risks that offsets the higher cost. If done correctly, and all that is what we have to capture in the
Yeah,
contract.
and
Right.
not done correctly, you got a Schoenberg, which was 10 years behind.
I'm sorry?
And not done correctly, you have a Schoenberg Airport,
Brandenburg.
Brandenburg, which was,
Right.
which was 10 years behind.
Totally,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's all in the contractual arrangement. The more that is captured upfront in that agreement, the better off you are. And that is really what in some of the projects that have not been as successful, it's typically because there's something that just was not captured very well in the actual agreement itself. Which goes back to Tracy's comment earlier, the critical nature of securing the right resources when you pursue a P3 cannot be emphasized enough. Because if you get the wrong resources, you started off in the beginning with a deficit.
I will say you are getting the operations and maintenance side of your money though, because you would, otherwise the airport's gonna have to staff that, right? If you have a contract, you're gonna have to run that or a parking lot. So for that extra spread on the money, you do get that side. You're not gonna have internally the need to manage it to the same level as if you own the facility yourself and are,
You're paying your employees less than what the city would pay.
or if fewer employees, yes. Or maybe they do it fewer, maybe they use more technology and, you have lots of, that's their innovation opportunity.
Yeah.
Robots.
So is operations and management always an element of P3?
Does not have to be. You can also do one or the other. Sometimes the public entity particularly wants to maintain it because they're doing the whole facility already, especially a terminal extension or something that's adjacent.
So our valley has a very opinionated design community. Are there any versions of this where we can get more control over design?
Yes, you can contract for that. Yeah, you would do that a couple of ways. One is, as you are doing the specifications for the project, you're still gonna give them design standards. You're gonna give them color, whatever it is, faucets for the bathrooms, whatever your design is. You put that in your RFQ at the beginning, so they know going in exactly what they're gonna get. There are ways too to build into the contract some design approval. So you can say at certain periods, you wanna sign off on it. You have to be careful because they still have all the power to design within the specifications. And if you start to make changes, you're gonna incur costs. So there are ways absolutely to control the design or make requirements, but that's great.
Can you talk a little, and thank you, by the way, for the presentation. It was really, really helpful and informative. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the risks that will be mitigated if we would engage in a project like this? You mentioned environmental being one of them.
And so you can depending on where you want to start the program. So you can start your developer before you've even done a phase 1 environmental to even see what's under, the sort of initial review. The earlier you transfer and the more risk you transfer to the developer, the more it's gonna cost, right? They're gonna want to be paid, they're gonna have it's called often a risk premium on top. So if they think it's gonna be $1 million, but you just, inserted some risk into that, they might say, ooh, maybe it's 1.5 just in case that happens. So you can start their work as early as you want, for example, and shift some of the risk to them that you will pay. I think environmental is a big one. certainly construction delays, we just had, coming out of COVID, a lot of issues less so with labor, but more with materials. That's a huge risk in any construction project of any time, right? So you've got all of the construction is a risk. You would shift as much of that as possible to them, especially under this design build sort of scheme.
The other one I would say is the revenue risk.
Yeah.
Right, so if you're building a project and you're financing a project, you're on the hook to pay back your bondholders. And if there's another COVID and the airport shuts down, you're the one that's in a financial risky situation. So, pardon me, the equity holders are at risk with a private entity. Pardon me.
Yeah.
Sorry, the desert. So that's the traditional risk. Anything that we think of transferring is that revenue risk, but if the project tanks, too bad, private party, public entity isn't responsible for that. That's their risk, 100%.
And it's typically a Goldman or another partner like a VC.
They've been more active,
Okay.
but not necessarily exclusively, and you can open it up to competition, like they did in Sacramento, which is one of the reasons they did that there.
Yeah, so, I think over the last couple of years, airports have come a long way in their ability to use pre-negotiated contract pricing to get things. In NASPO and a variety of other contract vehicles. How does that apply to P3? Are the private entities still allowed to use that type of contracting vehicle for pre-negotiated prices, or does that have to be a governmental agency?
I have to look at the program. I think it might be governmental, but I'm not sure how far it would stretch.
And would the airport be able to do that as part of the pre-negotiated?
Go look and see how to structure that, if you can structure that so that it would carry through all the way. Yeah. It's not done very much, because most airports just go do it.
Okay. So Harry and Scott, you look at the kind of where we are in the long range plan, we're moving now to the financing options as part of the proposal. What's the viability of this, do you think?
Gisela's gonna run through the viability in terms of I'll start there. In terms of the ability to do it, I think that's gonna really depend on the people in this room and people in this sitting on the dais sitting kind of, right? Ultimately, we are, like a lot of airports, in an infrastructure deficit. We're way behind where we should be. So there are opportunities here using a P3, particularly with Conrad, because it pays for itself. But that said, the community's not ready for it, the community's not ready for it.
Yeah, I would just say, gentlemen, as we look at, the commission has thought about trying to phase in the portions of it and how we look at phasing that in. I was in the Midwest when the whole Chicago debacle happened. So I'm pretty familiar with when they started issuing parking citations on St. Patrick's Day. That's when everybody's eyes open wide about, oh, we just lost control for a couple of years. The other thing that we talked about is, and they referenced it in their presentation, is the need for somebody who can really run a project like this and finding the right person. Here, his staff, they gotta run the airport on a day-to-day basis. So we've talked a lot about, at some point, trying to find some sort of project manager who's done one, if the commission wants to explore this, or whether it's a traditional design build, whether it's a CMAR, design, build, operate, maintain, whatever it is. But if you're going down this road of a P3, I think we really want to look at some sort of project executive who could run this whole project. Because it's going to be a big endeavor, and we just talked about the capacity of staff to, really do it and have the expertise to manage it. Because my rudimentary knowledge of P3s is if you don't have you don't have it laid out in the beginning, you're gonna pay for it in the back end. So it's not to say it's a bad thing, it could be a real good thing as we're gonna be having to look at the financial analysis of what the long-range revenue coming into the airport is, and what can we afford to do? And so, I think there'll be a lot of decision points for the commission down the road.
Sounds like that expertise, we're gonna need that expertise one way or another. Other questions?
I mean, you mentioned Reno's contract. Is that because they're a public entity, is that deal a public document that is available to review or?
It should be, yeah, the contracts are all public. Yeah. Yep, you can look at that, you can look at, their contract is out. We can give it to Harry.
Yeah.
Copy of it. Sacramento's RFPs on their website are available publicly, you can look at their documents that are done, I don't think we've done their contracts yet. They're still in their RFQ stage.
And is that all, do you know if they're all financed just through CFCs or is there other monies that have to be added?
There's other money. Sacramento, that's so early, we don't know exactly what it's gonna look like. That's gonna be part of the, pre-development agreement process. But Reno, there's other money invested.
So, Rick, do you want to just walk through kind of?
Sure, yeah, and I'll try to be fast, because I know some of it will be a little bit duplicative, and I'll try to run through that. There we go. Oops, it's on one screen, not the other. Go ahead and go to the next one. I'm going to skip the intro. I have some background on the term, but I think you guys know who we are now. We're actually a financial consultant on behalf of the PSC. Good. Go again.
It might delay, so.
Okay, there we go. We talked about P3s quite a bit, but I do want to emphasize the third bullet on this slide, which is it's not free money and it's not new revenue. You have to pay it back one way or the other, whether you're making an availability payment, which is basically just paying a regularly agreed to amount to reimburse the private entity for the investment they made, or the revenue that you would have collected yourself is now dedicated to the private partner to be able to recoup their investment. So either way, there is money flowing the private sector side, and it's not something that magically grew on, a new tree you planted out back, and you're able to pass it on to the private sector. That's one of the fundamental misunderstandings of P3s, because people have that perception that it's somehow, a new source that can be tapped into that gives you more capacity than you otherwise would have had, which is not the case, because if you look at either one of the major structures, and the money costs more, you asked that question, it's always more to finance than if you financed it yourself. But in the case of one of the structures I'll get to in a moment, you're diluting airport revenues, because for example, you take a consolidated rent car facility. If you're running it, you're collecting the revenues, right, from the various users, and you're using that to both pay the capital and the O&M expenses. If you have a private sector take it over, those revenues are now going to the private partner, which means the revenues that were in all of your financial metrics to hit all of your targets, cover your debt service, that money is now no longer in that equation. So you've diluted your financial metrics to a certain extent. And when you have the availability payment where you're just paying for it, you're still collecting revenue, you're just reimbursing the private sector for designing, building, financing, operating, and maintaining in most cases. There, what you've done, availability payments, I'll talk about in a moment, are considered debt to the airport. So you have now reduced your own bonding capacity because it sits on your balance sheet. What you owe the private sector is debt on your balance sheet. And that's how the financial markets see it, and that's how your investors see it. We can go forward. The one thing I'm going to point out here is they do work well in certain cases, right? And I think Tracy Sloan did a great job of describing a lot of those cases. One of the efficiencies someone asked about are those life cycle cost efficiencies. Those are usually one of the most significant and identifiable savings in a P3, is the private sector's innovation, and ability to tap into resources because of contracting. Someone else asked that question. They can contract more nimbly, more flexibly. They can negotiate differently than a governmental entity. That shows up in the life cycle. Also, the reinvestment in a good contract, they're required to reinvest on a regular basis, to turn back the asset in a certain condition. All of that is incorporated in the upfront cost, which is one of the reasons it's so more expensive. But the benefit of that is you do have a guaranteed reinvestment in your asset that you don't always make as a private owner, because sometimes other priorities come along and you just don't get to it. Financing flexibility, I mentioned, is a huge item to also consider. Next slide. Two major types in the airport world. There are an infinite number of variations and hybrids of these two. But if you look at the bookends of the structure of the P3 in the airport sector, it's a revenue risk deal or it's an availability payment deal. And like I said, there are variations swinging towards one or the other. The revenue risk is basically where the private entity comes in and does it all, designs, builds, finances. They collect the revenues and they're on the hook for whether or not those revenues are sufficient to reimburse their costs. On an availability payment, they do it all, but you, the owner, continue to collect the revenue, and then you're paying them whatever the agreed to amount is on a regular basis to reimburse them. The LaGuardia and JFK terminals were revenue risk deals, and the Los Angeles Landside Access Program, which includes the People Mover and the Conrack, are availability payment deals. We consulted on all of these, so we're very familiar with the ins and outs of these particular projects. Next slide. So some key components to kind of differentiate those two. On the availability payment side, as I said, the airport pays a developer, whatever that defined amount is, that's captured in the agreement, and they have a performance requirement as part of that. The certainty for the airport in this type of agreement is that there's rate setting authority that you retain. In other words, you get to decide what are the users of those facilities going to pay, because you are still controlling that aspect of it. And you also have budget certainty because you know for the 30, 35 years in the California case, how much you're going to have to pay them. So you have a nice level of certainty in your financial forecasting that you don't necessarily have in other structures. And the private sector is going to have to deliver, and they will have very defined delivery and performance requirements. I go back to, can I emphasize enough? Make sure you have an exceptional legal team on board, because the contracts are what drives what's going to happen over that 35-year period. And you cannot miss any of the components. And I'll emphasize again, rating agencies, when they go to rate these types of deals, they're going to treat that as airport debt. So if you do an availability payment deal, you have now really substantially reduced your bonding capacity. So you have to understand what that means in the long term, which goes back to, and I think that was you who said that. And by the way, you guys ask wonderful questions. I love this group. It's fantastic. But you have to understand, what does my entire capital program look like? What do I have to achieve within the time frame I need to achieve it? And then how does this fit into it? Because if you choose the wrong model or the wrong hybrid of those models, you can really reduce your flexibility and your ability to address other needs in the long term. So it cannot be looked at in isolation. It has to be viewed within your entire capital program and all of your needs in the long term. On the revenue risk side, the revenues are monetized. The private sector is monetizing those revenues to get their return and deliver what they're responsible for in return. Typically, an airport's going to negotiate an upfront payment, some lump sum upfront, some ongoing annuity, or some tiered or percentage revenue share, which is the best approach to go. One of those three, you want to get something out of it other than just turning it over and letting them get all the revenues. We're seeing more and more variations of that type of revenue share approach in the P3s recently. Again, it's the same thing. They design, build, finance, operate, and maintain, but they have to earn through the revenues that you have now given them control over. This is where that is off balance sheet. So you don't carry it on your balance sheet, so you have your bonding capacity, but what you have diluted, as I said, are your revenues, because you can no longer include those in your financial metrics. Move forward. I'm not going to go into all the details, but the revenue risk is much more complex than the availability payment when it comes to the relationship between the parties and the flow of funds, which is why I went ahead and included this diagram Because you'll see that typically the private entity comes together as a team, various players, they form a special purpose entity. So for example, if you get Goldman, someone asked about Goldman, they're gonna go in as Goldman. They're gonna form another special purpose entity or another subsidiary. They're gonna firewall themselves so that they're never on the hook. So it's never gonna come back up to the parent if they fail. So you always end up with an SPE of some type that ends up being your private partner. They collect those project revenues, flow them up in whatever the agreement is to the airport. They pay their debt. They get their return on their equity. And that structure also is so critical to capture very distinctly in the agreement. Flow of funds I have seen become convoluted in many P3 contracts because they're just not specified in enough detail. You can move forward. A couple of the P3s I mentioned earlier, I'll go through those really quickly. We talked on the next slide, talked about LaGuardia as a revenue risk deal. So basically the private partner was LaGuardia Gateway Partners. That's that SPE that was formed with Skanska, Meridian Infrastructure and Vantage. And that's already had some replacement. That's the other piece that's critical, is negotiating how, when they can actually sell their interest in the partnership. That happens in every long-term P3. I don't think I can think of one where that hasn't happened at some point. 4 million was the total. Again, big projects, but all of the principles and factors you need to consider are the same, whether it's $2 or several billion. The financing, they use special facility bonds. That goes back to that tapping into the private activity bonds. However, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey did contribute $1 billion in passenger facility charges, so the PFCs they collected in order to reduce the amount that had to be financed on the project. And then there was 200 million of equity. So that goes to that piece where I mentioned, you will always see a fairly small amount of equity invested in these projects when you look at the amount of debt and other funding that was applied. The lease expires in 2050. 22 is when they reach substantial completion, and yes, it is a beautiful facility. Next slide. This is some of the photos from that facility, and what the Gateway Partners' responsibility they took on for the 35 gates is, get it built, negotiate the lease agreement with the airlines because they're operating it, negotiate the tenant concession agreements, and then they were responsible for the move. And in that particular deal, the construction in the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, with all their new terminals at their airports, one of the primary drivers of them pursuing P3s was the risk of building in a very constrained space while they're operating the facilities. And that risk was so large, it was one of the primary drivers to go the P3 route for almost all of the terminals that they've been undertaking. The next example is the JFK terminal. We must have been thinking on the same lines there. And this particular one is the one with JetBlue as a partner. You got new Terminal 1, 9 billion, special project and developer equity, a lot more developer equity in this particular project. And then Terminal 6, 4.2 billion with special project bonds and equity. So you can see pretty similar approach. On the next slide is the LAX availability payment descriptions. You have the people mover getting passengers from the terminal to the consolidated rental car facility. There, the partner links issued the conduit debt. And then also 1.3 billion of the project was LAWA payments. So Los Angeles World Airports is paying the private partner on a regular basis for their investment. That's how the private partner is recouping. So LAX is still collecting all the revenues from the facility, and they're also paying the operating expenses by reimbursing the private partner for operating it. What that does is, as I mentioned earlier, LAX carries that debt, not the bond debt, because that's the private developer's debt, but the payment they're making to the private developer. That debt is carried on their balance sheet, just like your bond debt is. And the Conrad, same agreement, a different partnership on that one, but you asked about the funds. There are 800 million of CFC bond proceeds and then PAYGO, basically the CFCs as they're collecting it. So they use CFCs as backstop for that particular project. On the next slide, sample process to think about, and this comes into the financial evaluation as well. You can move forward on the next one. You hit the nail on the head. That's why I said I love this group. You've got a great commission, and that is see number one, you have to have that, you have to have your committee or your champions of the project that have to make themselves available. So in this case, Harry would need to be there, to be available for the team, to provide guidance as needed, but you need that project manager, right? That is going to make sure that they can coordinate with all of the project, consultants and others on board that you need, which is the second one. You have to develop that scope, get the right team in place to support you. It's important to get the legal analysis done early. This is all the early assessment stuff. So if you're even thinking about doing it, you do it now, because it takes time to get this done. Do you have the legal authority? Do you have the procurement authority and all of the other pieces that go along with that? Another piece, you have to make sure this integrates well with your bond documents. With your bond indenture, we have found there are frequently various requirements in the bond documents for your existing debt to your bond investors, where you have to be careful of where in the lien or the priority of repaying your debt this would fall, because your current bondholders will not allow a P3 deal to rise above them in the waterfall of who gets paid first. And then there's other restrictions that sometimes come into play. You have grant assurances from the FAA related to how your existing facilities, and you have to go through your facilities carefully and make sure that you understand where your obligation to the FAA for any of those are, if you use any federal funds on it. Airline agreements often have their own little hiccups in them that you have to take into consideration to make sure you address them, and so do your other tenant agreements. Then you can finally start selecting a delivery model and starting down that road. And your procurement schedules are important to do up front. Stakeholders were mentioned earlier. The risk identification and mitigation, we talked about environmental, but there's right-of-ways, utilities, third parties, energy, interfaces with other governmental entities. The list is a mile long of what you need to coordinate up front in order to make sure you have cleared all the hurdles appropriately. Next slide. The value for money analysis. So to get from program foundations, which was that assessment piece I talked about, to get to where you can actually start your procurement, you still have a couple of steps. So first you said, we've done all the homework, we know where the hurdles are, we know how to clear them, we're ready to go. Then you have to make sure you understand those project characteristics, which goes to how much control do you want, all the things Tracy mentioned earlier. Then you need to develop your goals for the project, exactly what it is you're hoping to achieve, what do you want it to look like, all of those items. Then you get to the value for money analysis. It's qualitative and quantitative. What this does is it takes the project under an owner delivery, typical government conventional delivery. What would that look like, both qualitatively and in resource? How can you deliver it? How quickly can you deliver it? And then the quantitative, how much is it going to cost? What is the financing you would use? And then you build what we call a shadow bid, which is you prepare the comparison from a private sector perspective under the various delivery models, and you compare the two. Am I getting enough value for my money? It is not always a pure quantitative, which is why it's a qualitative decision. There are times where P3s are pursued when the dollar amount at the end of the day, even over the life of the entire project, is higher because of the other qualitative benefits and risks we talked about earlier. And that is your real decision point as to, am I going to move forward or not with a P3? At that point, you know, as I said, you either say no conventional, or you pick your P3 option. You go through your procurement, you know, through your procurement stages to prepare, and then off to the races you go. But as you can see, it is an extremely time-intensive process. What I would offer is, there is a reduced version of this that every public entity should undertake with any major contract, because it will serve you well in getting to delivering a successful project. I think in government sometimes we're too quick to just kind of do business as we've always done business. So we procure the way we've always procured, and we don't do enough homework. So there's a lot of value in here that could be translated into. Next slide. So the process, the one thing I've added here is RFIs can often be useful. And those are requests for information where you just basically ask the market, what do you think? Is there interest? Come see us, come talk to us. Tell us what you think. How do you envision this? And that helps you form your RFQ. The best approach in a P3 we have found, in our estimation, is shortlisting in the RFQ process. using that shortlisted 3 or 4 teams to help you develop your RFP. Because the more information you have in the RFP for the bidders to respond to, the better the bids are that you're going to get, because they have a clear understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve. If you leave that fairly open-ended, I can give you an example. LAX went out 3 times on a procurement for their cargo campus redevelopment. Did not have a very defined RFP, and the market could never respond. He said, we can't respond to it. You haven't given us enough information to respond. Finally went out with a very defined RFP that went through this process, and now they have a developer on board, and they're going to completely redo their cargo campus, which involves 23, 26 facilities as a PPA. Next slide. So in summary, and then I'll speak to the high level financial piece of it. We want to get into the numbers today. As you can see, there's work to be done before we get into detailed numbers. But you can probably take this whole conversation and summarize it into this one statement. Evaluate whether you do it or not, if it aligns with your operational and financial goals and objectives. So you do all that, and if the answer is yes, pursue. The answer is no, or we're not sure, either do more, if it's no, you stop. If it's, we're not sure, then you probably need to do a little bit more homework. As to whether it's feasible here, absolutely. It's feasible almost anywhere, because it all depends on what your lawyers can put in a contract to help achieve what you may be, needing to close, fill a hole, whatever it is. What I would say though is the final answer for here is there has to be a detailed evaluation of your capital program in its entirety. What are the various funding sources that you have available to fund that? How can we best leverage each of those funding sources? And then where does a P3, if at all, fit in? It could be that in the full evaluation, things can be done in a manner where a P3 just isn't needed or doesn't contribute in a positive manner. Or it could be that there is a glaring obvious hole where a P3 makes perfect sense. But you gotta get to the first step. So thank you for being patient and bearing with me through that process. If you have any questions, I know it's a long evening here.
Question, please. Real quick question. The airport construction world in P3, is this a big project in Palm Springs? The big or small compared to what you see?
There are, I can't remember which one of you listed the different projects, but P3s go from individual, very small facilities to entire airports. We have one underway in the Virgin Islands right now where we're privatizing 2 airports, entire airports. We have another one underway where all we're doing is a small logistics facility.
Okay.
So there is interest in projects like these regardless of the size.
I see our city CFO with his hand up. Chris, has your head exploded yet? Do you have a question for us, Chris? You're on mute. No, I think that's
just the hand. Just a cursor.
Has exploded. Any other questions? We gave you a shot, Chris. Any other questions? So this is really complicated, and so thank you for getting us started and thinking about this. The next step of our plan is to figure out financing for all of this. So, for all the complaints that were made about LaGuardia for all of those years, when you fly into there now, I mean, it's just unbelievable. You've gone from a third world airport to this magnificent piece. So, that alone and what they've done in Kennedy is quite a testament to the power of P3s. So I think we're a lot smarter as a result, and obviously we have a lot more work to do. So thank you all for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Do we have any public comments? Do we have any public comments on Zoom? If you do, please raise your virtual hand. No public comments. All right, comments are closed.
All right, let's move forward. I know this took a little longer than we expected. We're going to bang through some other things, but this next thing is a 5-year strategic plan. We all have participated in the creation of this and the input of this. Harry?
Thank you, Chair, and we're gonna try to speed this up a little bit, but last December, I committed to this commission that we would pursue a strategic plan for the airport, 5-year strategic plan. We have done that. We went out, did some significant outreach, we workshopped this, over multiple months. And we now have a document in place that we would like the commission to consider and, approve tonight. On the line with us, we have Paul Clark and Sam Alexander from Intervistas. And if you guys could just 5, maybe 8 minutes run through the planning document and give us some context.
Yeah, we'll do our very best. Delighted to be back with the commission again. And yes, thank you, Harry, and thank you all for your great participation September 12th. In the 3 months that we've been involved since the September 12th meeting, we'll just cut to the chase just in terms of getting to the outcome here and looking for ultimately acceptance of the document so that we can take this forward on your behalf to Mayor and Council. Sam, if you go to the next slide, please. Just very quickly, you'll remember this from September 12th. We've had a very progressive and fulsome process, as Harry has alluded to. If you remember, when we were back with you in September 12th, we were in strategy development. And since that point in time, we've had a number of meetings with the PSP senior team and working through just to develop the ultimate strategic plan document and action plan for the next 5 years. So you see in there phase 4, we've been hard at work just to make sure that we can have a very actionable document for you in this very transformative time over the next 5 years. Next slide, please, Sam. In your package, you obviously have a very well-developed document. It's about 30 pages or so that articulate the vision, mission, values, and strategic priorities going forward, and how that translates into actions for the PSP team, as well as all of the partners going forward. So you'll remember from a few months ago, we were trialing some of the vision statements, the mission statements, and the values, and we took your wise counsel and went back to the drawing board. But if you remember at that time from September, we were in a position where there was very positive feedback for the work that had been done and the co-creation that had been done with the PSP team, as well as all of the stakeholder input being reflected. So here we have the vision of an iconic airport passionately connecting Greater Palm Springs to the world, with the mission of moving you with unforgettable hospitality and values of pride, passion, responsibility, integrity, diversity, and exceptionalism. And in the document itself, it does clearly articulate the meaning and the thrust behind all of these statements and the alignment on all of organizational approach in this. Cascading around these vision, mission, and values pieces are the 5 strategic priorities that we've landed on your behalf: people and culture, operational excellence, partnerships, infrastructure, and sustainability. If you go to the next slide, please, Sam. We want to make sure that the goals for all of these strategic priorities are SMART goals, that they're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they're time-bound. So we've got very clear, attainable, meaningful, and hopefully you would appreciate impactful targets over the next 5 years. So each of these particular priorities have been worked through and in a very purposeful way aligned to a series of initiatives that have resources and budgets behind them, and a set of clear targets as well. If we go to the next slide, please, Sam. You'll see here, this is just an illustration of some of the pages of the strategic plan as well. So hopefully you'll appreciate that in each of these priority areas, we've got a very well-developed and aligned set of goals, initiatives, timeframes, and targets. And you'll see there that we have, in this example for people and culture, 4 goals on expansion of workforce, strengthening culture and engagement, increasing training programs, and championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in each of these priority sets that we have within the document, it's got that level of articulation to it and that level of discipline and focus going forward. And on your behalf as the Commission, all of the key activities that you would expect from PSP, we believe are embraced, and they're definitely reflected within the document. We go to the next slide, please, Sam. Just actually as finally, in terms of the measurement of this, if you have SMART goals, one of the key things obviously is making sure that we can track and hold everyone accountable for this achievement of this ambitious plan that is going to have a transformative impact for the greater Palm Springs area as well as the Coachella Valley. And so under the banner of Progress PSP, which is an initiative that the PSP team have formulated, there's going to be a 3-step program in terms of getting back to you and getting back to the community and getting back to Mayor and Council about how the progression of the plan is unfolding. So there's 3 steps here. There's going to be an inbuilt ongoing measurement and monitoring of progress against the plan, and very regular reporting back to the Commission, to the city and the community under the banner of Progress PSP. And lastly, and importantly, there'll be summary highlights of achievements, but there'll also be in areas where the market is fluid and changes, if we've got new developments economically or fiscally, or from a set of new entrants into the market or exits from the market, or where tourism development is going, there's going to be adjustment and flexibility, and that has been inbuilt in here. So if there's lessons learned and strategic responses, this will remain an evolving and well-tooled plan going forward. So I think we'll leave it at that. We were making adjustments on the presentation, knowing that you have a lot of agenda items to get through, Commission, and maybe I'll just send it back to Harry if there's any sort of closing remarks, but we just wanted to keep it to this level for you all and open it up for questions.
Thank you, I appreciate it, Paul, and really this was an important initiative for me personally because we really did not, for this airport, have structures in place with the ability to track things or understand where we were even headed. So the goal here was to start to create those foundational documents so that we knew where we're going and how we're going to achieve that, and that we're being transparent about this process. So I appreciate InterVistas for leading or helping leading the charge on this. I appreciate this commission for participating. And with that, questions? Or comments?
Questions?
Ben? I think it's well done. It's impressive.
Thank you.
So, when you do this type of stuff, the proof is in putting all of this. So I'd just be interested in asking the staff, you've gone through this process. What are you going to do differently as a result of this work? Is there something that shouts out to you in terms of the scope of your responsibilities or things you've thought about? Because you've obviously all participated in this. What will you do differently as a result of this? Just short term. How do you react to this?
Yeah,
I'd love to hear from everybody.
You want me to start, right?
Yeah, you can start.
I think we are really going to focus for the next 4 or 5 years and even beyond that on business planning, because we don't do that often enough. We're often reactive here, just reacting to the moment, reacting to the external factors, the situation. And I want to keep proactive and really being intentful about where this airport is headed and what we're trying to do, whether it's financially, whether it's with innovation, whether it's with people and culture, making sure that we're doing that. So beyond this, the goal is to sit down with my staff and with InterVistas, with the city manager, with the city council, with this group, and start to develop those yearly annual plans so that we're moving in the right direction.
How about you, Chairman?
I think for me, it was, there was a lot of value in going through the mission and vision and values and spending time, creating those and really taking hold of those. And I think, it was kind of a invigorating kind of exercise to, you know, why are we here? What are we doing? You know, what is our focus? And so I think it was a good exercise for us to go through, and I think we should continue to, you know, revisit. And I don't know how often we're gonna revisit, but I think it was good for everybody to go through.
Daniel?
I would agree with what Jerry said, and I'm looking forward to going over the projects within my division and seeing how we're going to fit in with this and move together with Harry. It'd be nice having something, guiding us going forward to like a goal to work for instead of, yeah, as Harry said, being reactionary as we have in the past.
Victoria, how about you? What would you do differently as a result of this?
What would I do differently? Well, for starters, I preached the mission and the vision to staff and our tenants. I think that's, you know, we didn't really have like a framework that was established before. And so now that we've received everybody's buy-in and input, it wasn't just us that created this by ourselves. You know, we've worked with our community, our stakeholders. So, you know, getting their input and their participation in this allows them to be accountable and have some ownership in this. So now this is kind of like setting the path going forward. And so as long as we're, you know, practicing and preaching this and continuing to include everyone in it, I think that it's gonna be really successful for us. So I think that this is a real good foundation. So I think it's just a playbook for us to continue preaching.
And what's our accountability in terms of reviews? Is it annual review?
Annual reviews. So we're gonna track, basically quarterly, in some cases even daily, what we're doing. And then at the end of the year, assess if we hit those targets and adjust as needed.
This is the program that has 140 projects. Is this the one that we saw that had all those projects?
Well, this is intended to help create some focus around those 140 projects that we have. We have a lot, not only in capital needs, but also operationally that we're trying to achieve. So if we know that, if we're proactively defining what that looks like over the next year or 5 years or 10 years, that'll help us get there a little more efficiently.
Other questions? Please.
Just not to bring a comment, actually. Credit to you and the team, really, because I know we've heard this a few times before and we've heard it publicly as well, is that you inherited a lot of deferred maintenance. And you started this game behind the goal line. So we know that it's been one of those pieces where we've all kind of required a little more attention on the thinking and the framework. But, you know, kudos to you guys for really kind of bringing this to and getting us to a point where we can now springboard and move forward.
The action plan here is to go to city council. Before we do that, any comments from the public here or online on this?
If you have a public comment, please raise your hand. If you have a public comment on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand. We have no public comments. Public comments for this item are closed.
All right. So again, ditto, lots of work here. Proofs in the pudding. The idea that we get to annually review, I think is important.
Just wondering, you know, there's a lot of initiatives in here. In some ways, it feels very ambitious. And so I'm wondering if there's been work done to prioritize these various initiatives.
Yes, and actually it started off with way more initiatives we got over here. Get some focus. So yes, to a degree, there has been some of that is continuing to work with InterVistas. They're helping us along this journey with the planning and what it looks like when we do certain things and how that impacts certain things down the line. So yes, we are doing that.
Cool. I need a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Second.
All right. Banks.
Yes.
Behrman.
Yes.
Burke.
Yes.
Caldwell.
Yes.
Corcoran.
Yes.
Evansteiner.
Yes.
Feldman.
Yes.
Baum.
Aye.
Hedrick.
Yes.
Keel.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
McDermott.
Yes.
Park.
Yes.
Hi.
Enthusiastic, yes.
Sam Latstead.
Yes.
Wise.
Yes.
Wiseman.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes.
Thank you.
Your task is Paul and team. Thank you for your good work. Look forward to your continued support of this. Thank you, staff.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about the art policy and curator. We have some exciting recommendations that will finally, right, Victoria? Finally get art into our airports. So Victoria, I'll let you lead.
So, Commissioners, as you may have noticed, we fulfilled your packet with so many staff reports. So we're really gonna try to make this a point going forward to give you as much information as we can, so you can, do the reading and ask the questions if you have questions. So we wanna really prepare you ahead of time. That's something that we as an executive team committed to. So, as you can see, there is a staff report in there in regards to our airport art program. What we're proposing for you tonight is to recommend to the city council the adoption of a policy governing the program requirements for the selection, procurement, and maintenance of airport art. And so with that, as you know, the airport currently does not have an arts program in place right now. And so what we're proposing is to create this, well, we've created this policy, and in this policy, we're really trying to establish the goals and objectives and the makeup of actually creating an art working group that consists of the executive director, 2 public arts commission members, 2 airport commission members, and a non-voting advisory that will help us establish a selection process, criteria for art installations, and address the terms, the maintenance and conservation and community engagement interest for the program itself. So, we're also proposing that we're going to be allocating a 1% airport allocation for any projects that exceed over $1 million. So, so when we do those projects, we're gonna be designating those art improvements towards the airport campus at the discretion of the executive director. In addition to that, we've also prepared a scope of work, which is also included for a arts curator. We're also asking for the commission to help recommend the art curator scope of work. And that person is gonna actually help us with the whole arts program. So if you have any questions, I'm available for questions. Please let me know if you'd like me to expand on anything.
Questions, comments about this?
Comment.
Please.
I think it's great. This is a big step forward in making this process concrete. My only suggestion, and I'm just gonna be blunt here, working with members of the Arts Commission has been, let's call it inconsistent, their participation, availability, etc. I would just suggest that we, include in here that there be 2 members from the Arts Commission or alternates designated by them, so we have other people to work with when the 2 people don't show up, or one of the 2 people don't show up, and for being parallel and, making this look fair, we should do the same from the Airport Commission, although I'm sure our participants will be present as they've been consistently in the last several years. It has been, a topic that we tried to move forward. I think it's a great document structure.
Other questions? Victoria, do you have is the curator a full-time airport employee? Is it consultant?
It would be a consultant. We would be putting it out to bid and hiring a consultant to assist that.
So we still go through procurement to get this, even though they're independent. Okay.
Just wondering how the 1% figure was done too.
It was an industry standard that we went out and went to other airports. We asked around, and that was like a common practice that we saw.
Is the $1 million threshold for that also common, or is that a more localized position?
I think that was something we came up with on our own. Given the projects that we have, and that we've been doing for the past, I think, whenever we were coming up with an amount for it, I think just given all of our projects, we thought that that was probably a very conservative number for us, because we don't have a lot of projects that are under and over $1 million. It's just kind of a 50-50 there. So I think that was probably where we came up with our area.
No, that's. Based on your 5-year capital plan, do you have a model that shows, okay, that 1% equates to X dollars in 2025, Y dollars in 2026? Because we got a lot of money going out in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
1% is a lot.
Right.
So
We don't have a
is there
model
a cap,
for you today.
is there a cap that you were thinking, 1% up to X?
Yeah, so it's 1% of the local match. So for example, if we had a $2 million project and the federal government funds 90% of that project, our match, it's 1% of our match of that. But we have not modeled that. We will model that going into the budget.
But I do like your idea about that.
Yeah. Without knowing the parameters, 1% sounds great, but they're $5 million a year because of what we're spending.
Did you maybe recommend that we revise that include that in our policy?
Personally, I would, but it's not doing it.
So, for those of you who haven't been here this long, this has been a thorn in our side for over 2 years. We had €1, and that's what we got to show for all the effort that the operations committee put in with the art commission, trying to get more art here. The agreement with the museum was terminated and also all that left. So I just think, kudos to you, Victoria, and team. I mean, this is such a step forward, and the most important thing, it brings the control back to us. As hard as our other commissioners and other commissions work, this really puts us in the driver's seat for this, which is just great. And I'll be thrilled to see how the council reacts to this. I'm sure they're gonna be excited about this.
The kudos to definitely goes to the team for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to the team, because this is great work. And, we had an opportunity to meet with a woman who was running the Ontario Report. Curator for them. So we heard about a lot of these ideas, but this is really good about steroids. So this is great. This is great for, and with that, can I go to a motion to approve?
Motion approved, Mr. Feldman's,
Yes.
changes in, I'm sorry,
Martin.
Commissioner
Martin's, suggestion.
Before we do that, can we,
Oh, any public comment? I'm sorry.
There's public comments for this item, so.
All right. So,
I'll second, I
yes.
will second.
Good. All right, let's do the roll call, please.
Banks.
Yes.
Behrman.
Yes.
Burke.
Yes.
Caldwell.
Yes.
Corcoran.
Yes.
Evan Steiner.
Yes.
Feldman.
Yes.
Fong.
Aye.
Hedrick.
Yes.
Keel.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
McDermott.
Yes.
Hart.
Yes.
Five. Yes. Sam Laska.
Yes.
Wise. Wiseman.
Yes.
Daniel.
Do you anticipate there will be much debate? Will this wind up on a consent calendar, do you think?
Now, it's public art, so it certainly wouldn't surprise me that city council members would like to chat about it a little bit.
Let us know if you feel like there's room for public debate, we'd be happy to show up and support it. If you feel that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll coordinate with the chairman, if we think that it's gonna happen. Oftentimes, it's really positive when the chair of the commission shows up to make some preliminary remarks to it, so.
Happy to support this.
Okay.
Happy to support this. Okay. All right. Leasing policy, we're pushing to next month. Revenue advertising policy.
All right, so this action is to adopt a policy for airport advertising revenue. In terms of our advertising program that lives in our non-aeronautical revenues, it's a very crucial part in maintaining those non-aeronautical revenues. But as we grow as an airport, and as we start to formalize, the theme of the night has been formalizing things, start to formalize our processes, we wanted to add some structure around the revenue advertising policy. And so we've included a policy in the agenda packet. Really what this does is it establishes a formal process for sponsorships, naming rights, and how those are evaluated, and how those move forward through not only the staff structure, but up to the city manager and through the city council. And so we're asking the commission tonight to approve that, the policy going forward.
Comments, questions? What's different? What lessons have we learned, for example, in our naming that's reflected in some changes here?
I think the biggest difference is that So typically with the advertising program, that's a staff level decision. And we, in this latest contract, for advertising, we have attempted to be innovative with it, but we didn't necessarily bring everybody along. So now we're trying to bring everybody along and make sure that everybody's included in the process, and that we're all working from the same sheet of music.
Any public comments, perhaps from our partners at Hughes?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, staff, my name is Rich Gordon, and I serve as the Government and Community Relations Specialist for Hughes, your partner in the airport advertising program. We're responsible for the implementation and maintenance of the program. I want you to know that we fully support the adoption of a policy in this arena. But tonight, I would like to ask you to postpone the vote to carry this item over to your next meeting. We'd like the opportunity to meet with staff, with the marketing committee, to discuss the implications of this policy as it relates to our contract and to the contracts that currently exist with advertisers and the pending contracts that we're working on. We want to make sure we're doing this right. And in that regard, we've been making great progress. Later in the meeting, in your finance report, I think you'll see that the revenue to date through the first 5 months of this fiscal year in the advertising program is at 60% of your total annual goal. We're going to blow through the advertising revenue. We want to keep that momentum going, and the best way we think to do that is to give us time to work with the staff to make sure that we're doing this in the right way. So I would ask tonight that you consider postponing the vote and continuing this item to the next meeting to give us time to have that process with the staff. Thank you.
Is there any,
So we're doing the naming rights policy approval process. Why not also bring in something of this magnitude to the full commission for review?
Before we answer, is there any other further public comments? If you have a comment on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand. Public comments for this item are closed.
a little louder, please, one more time?
So when I look at the naming rights policy and the approval process, it says all naming rights agreements must be reviewed by the Marketing and Business Development Committee of the Commission and approved by the Executive Director. I'm wondering, typically we just did this. At the Marketing Committee, we said we should follow this up to the full airport commission of this, of the magnitude, this sort of decision. I'm just wondering. That's not the process.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things there, and I can address that directly. There are a couple of things there. So the first is we can absolutely, if that's the recommendation tonight, we can absolutely do that. I don't think anybody on the staff has a problem with that. With the advertising program, that's typically been a staff level decision historically, not just within this contract, but going years and years back. And what we try to do is create a little bit more transparency by bringing it to the committee level. But I don't have a problem with the entire commission reviewing it. You'll get that opportunity anyway, so we bring it in staff reports. But if you want to see that process ahead of time, that's fine.
I think for obvious reasons, it's really important. Anything with a naming component to it should come to the commission. And I'd rather see it come early in the process with all the details than later in the process. So I think you bring a good point. But do you have any issues with us postponing a month? And, they are our vendor and they're kicking ass here to provide some input on this.
I have no issues with it.
All right. Are you okay with that? Can we just post? And then we'll ask your team to come and join it, and there may be other things. And also, let's make sure Kevin's point is included on this. Anything the naming rights, I think the commission should be about at whatever level it is. And let's push it off to our next meeting and give you a chance to jump into that. Thank you. Okay with everybody? All right, we're gonna postpone and move that off to the next month.
Hey, can I get a motion in a second to postpone the item?
I so moved that we postpone for 1 second.
All in favor? Can I do that, or do you wanna do roll call?
Do the roll call votes.
Okay, go for it.
Thanks.
Yes.
Merriman?
Yes.
Burt?
Yes.
Caldwell?
Yes.
Corcoran,
Yes.
Evanstein,
Yes.
Stockman. Yes. Fong. Heather,
Yes.
Keel,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McDermott,
Yes.
Hart,
Yes.
Pie,
Yes.
Sam Leska,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Wiseman,
Yes.
and Young.
Yes.
Thank you, Harry. I think it'll be better. And I'll be interested to get your feedback. We will be interested in getting your feedback on this as well. All right, so let's move on to measure J. That would be.
All right. So the item before you tonight is to provide the commission an update on previously approved Measure J projects, as well as the current status of the Measure J and Measure D funds, and then present a revised recommendation for project modifications and fund reallocation based on the new cost estimate and the prehistoric preservation considerations. So, I actually have with me tonight, her name is, well, with all of us tonight, her name is Nikki Gomez. She's the aviation planner. She's actually sitting over there. Say hi, Nikki. So she's gonna speak a little bit on the shape structure once we get to that project. So I'm just kind of gonna go down the list here and just give some background on what we've done in the past here. So, in the past, we've talked about that the airport has these two different types of local taxes for that we collect a 1% sales tax on Measure J, and then we collect a 0.5% sales tax on Measure D, passed back in 2018. And those funds are officially restricted to the airport for the use with no risk of forfeiture. Back in September 2023, we provided a list. The airport provided a list of capital projects to be funded with the Measure J funds. We deliberated with the airport commission, and the airport commission revised the project list that was provided by staff and voted on 4 different projects. Those projects that were voted on for approval to go, or for recommendation to go to the city council, was the shade structure for Uber Lyft and taxi pickup area for $1 million. Carpet replacement in the main terminal lobby and security checkpoint for $400,000, 8 water fill stations for portable water bottles, $50,000, and then a mid-century outdoor seating benches, circular benches, interior benches, and cement planting structures for $100,000. So total, we had estimated a little bit over 1.5 million that we were going to recommend to the city council, which in February 2024. City council did approve the funding of those capital projects from the Measure J funds. So that's our history. Where we're at today is that we have completed the 8 water fill stations. So that's completely finished. We are in the procurement process for the mid-century seating and structures. That was the project that had the budget of $100,000. We've because our quotes, any quotes that are over $10,000, it requires apples to apples as well as 3 quotes. So we're going through that right now and reviewing that to make sure we're meeting our procurement requirements. Our shade structure is in progress, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nikki to give some color commentary on the shade structures. Nikki?
For sure. Good evening, commissioners. So I just wanted to provide some update and kind of a layout on what will this project entail for the staff and commission in the approval process. So as you see in the report, we've identified the areas that were identified are those existing now, which is the shape structure to the TNC, which is Uber Lyft and taxi, and those are in their existing locations, which is in the middle lane, right outside the terminal. A little bit to the south, and the taxi just a little bit to the north. And so that being said, with that location alone, we are, as our, I should say, part of this building and part of the protection, we consulted in city planning, which is our historic preservation officer, essentially will set the guidelines as to this protected landmark, which is the Webster Terminal. And so from her assessment, just by the location of this shade, this proposed or potential shade structure, we will require and we'll have to go before the Historic Site Preservation Board, which is the HSP. And what that entails is we are to develop a complete scope of this project. Design, not completely designed, it could be 30–60%, but enough that there is materials selected, the type of design structure that may complement the Webster Terminal to go before them for their approval. Now, of course, right, as you might already know, there is the risk that we're gonna take in going before them, just like any typical project would. Staff will refrain their comments and recommendation until after they see this design, of course, before you as well, and to make that recommendation before the HSBB. Now, let's moving forward, let's say we do go before HSPB, what does it entail for our staff in terms of having that, project into the real world, right? And so we will have to make sure that we fully assess its utility, of course, as the way that, if this shade is going to be utilized during these hours, whatever that may be of shade, completely covering the pedestrian areas, which is intended to be. And, we have to make sure that we understand that our building is oriented north-south with the, sun, setting at the west. And then similarly, we will also have to make sure that we are also aware that this airport is, it's a military base, right? And it is, the utilities that run underground are quite, I should say, elusive. This is from the experience of what we've had, right, on the air side with the fleet structure that we just recently installed. And so we'll make sure to keep that in mind, and I want to make sure that the commission is purview of this information with whatever direction you would like to provide staff to move forward. But any questions about this?
I think one more thing too, I think you had asked us, what is the likelihood, right, that HSPB would actually approve something like this? And maybe you could talk a little bit to that, Nikki, so that it gives the commission, maybe an idea percentage wise, or an idea whether we want to spend the time and resources to designing something like this when HSPB may only, maybe probably not a chance that it does get, or maybe there is a chance. And so
this information was laid out to our historic preservation officer, right? Where we are preliminarily asking, here is what we have, this is the location with what we have, and if the comments back to us is, of course, very conservative. Is conservative because the way that our local designation, which is a class 1 designation on the western facade, and actually national registry as well, because we're both registered in both, is that the designation alludes to the Webster Terminal being the way it is oriented towards the San Jacinto Mountains, and that view shed has to then be clear of sort of any structures. Now, does that explicitly say no? It alludes to the protection of the asset, which is the Webster Terminal, and anything that then would affect it in any shape or form, whether that is detached to the structure, is going to compromise its designation. And so we just have to make sure that I guess, assurances really can be made, but there is a concern about the view shed being blocked, and that is a concern in a staff level. And then we're gonna preview this, that of course, staff level is not, our word isn't final, and so that's why because of this subjectivity, it has to be from the HSBB's decision.
Okay,
Thank you, Nikki.
thanks, Nikki. That's very helpful.
So then the fourth project that we have is the terminal flooring project, which we originally said we were gonna do carpeting. But we're actually proposing to modify this and do terrazzo flooring and then do a reallocation of the funds if the commission recommends that. But I'll go into that because I have 4 options for you. So just give me a second. Let me get to it. And then there's also the opportunity for an alternate project recommendation. So, you know, we've heard loud and clear from the community, and even from some of our airlines and maybe new airlines that they're really interested in a federal inspection services, building, temporary building, and then a permanent building. And so, you know, we've even gone through our studies for the FIS, and we have, you know, a plan and a path forward where, you know, we know how much staffing is gonna be if we were to have the CBP officers here. And we wanna be able to show that we have the funding for those CBP officers, whenever we present our plan to, the CBP, federal office. So, we're also making a recommendation that we could potentially allocate some of our Measure J, Measure D funds to the FIS annual operating costs and or infrastructure. So, so that's an alternative project that we have there. So what we're actually recommending is, like I mentioned, there's 4 different options. So option A is to allocate up to an additional 2.6 million towards the terrazzo flooring. So that the project total will be about $3 million. With that means that we would allocate 1 million from the shade structure funds. So that means that we would have to vote tonight that we no longer want to pursue the shade structure. And then we would allocate some remaining Measure J fund balance, which is $952,000, almost $1 million. And then we would allocate Measure D, as well as the pretty much the full balance of our Measure D funds. Almost, I think it's like $1.2 million of Measure D. That's option A. Option B is the FIS infrastructure and operating cost investment. So we would allocate 3.1 million towards the FIS, which 1 million would be towards infrastructure development, almost $1 million from the remaining Measure J balance reserved for operating costs, and then 1.2 million from Measure D. Option C is the shade structure. We'd allocate it all to the flooring project. Looks like let's see, hold on, I got a long one here. So we propose that the Uber lifts and taxi shade structure project, we would propose it to the HSBP and the planning commission. If the boards approve the project, then we would proceed with the design and construction of the shade structure as depicted in figure 1, and then allocate the remaining Measure J and Measure D funds to the flooring project. And then the shade structure allocate to the FIS. So if we propose it to the HSPB and the planning, and if the board approves the project, then we proceed with the design of the shade structure, and then we allocate the remaining funds of Measure J and Measure D to the FIS project. So essentially, what ends up happening, Commissioner Hendrick, I think you have your hand up. No.
Yeah, the FIS, is that, can you just to refresh our memory?
Yeah, so the FIS is the Federal Inspection Services for the facility for our CBP officers to be housed. So whenever we get international flights, so that's the goal, is once we get the international flights to the airport, that would fund that. Infrastructure operating costs.
That's what I wanted to make sure before we. Okay.
Commissioner Barron?
With these funds, is that FIS a permanent facility or a temporary facility compared to the baggage claim issues that we were talking about?
This would be a temporary facility.
Temporary, yes.
What timeline?
You know.
I'm shocked it's even on here. We've been talking about FIS being 12-month, 24-month, 48-month project, and you're trying to kill shade structure for an FIS project that's like so conceptual and theoretical. It's kind of a joke.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback.
You're welcome.
One kind of question or I just wanted to make, I don't recall there being a taxi shade structure as part of this deal, and I really think that the taxi portion of that shade structure is a complete waste of time. You shouldn't even bother bringing it to this local board because they'll get shot at right away. We know that. The Uber Lyft section has a chance.
What's the difference? Where it's located?
Yeah, because the taxi shade structure is directly in front of Wexler, the original Wexler terminal, and it will get shut down.
Got it.
Without. So let's not waste our time on that. Uber Lyft is further away in the sort of new head house, so that may actually be okay.
I don't know if this is more our attorney question or if this would be a Scott style sort of question. But let me ask it anyways. So if historic says we have a problem with this, but the airport commission says we have a commitment to customer experience and customer comfort, and our 2-month summers are now spanning to 3 or 4, and so there's a sense of urgency around this just in terms of the efficiency of the airport. Does that trump or could it trump a concern from the historical board, or do they trump the commission?
I mean, I think there's one of two things that could happen. One is if the historic board disagreed, maybe they send it back to the commission to work on it a little more, see if something makes sense. I guess both commissions could insist on sending it forward to council, letting the councils sort it out, but it seems to me first option would be a little better to try and work through it a little bit, see. I think you're right about your comments and, you know, maybe the second one, they have some comments, but you could work through it. If they had some concerns, maybe it would come back to the commission could tweak it a little.
But ultimately, the council can decide which way they want to go on this.
Yeah.
Okay, but I wasn't sure if historical stuff trumps everything here.
Commissioner Berman?
Where do we see the design, the shade structure? Because I can see historical could look at one and go, absolutely not, but this one is perfect. So where do we see design?
We never really got into it, right? Because we didn't pull the trigger, so we have no designs to consider. But that would certainly be, you know, what is the design that we think would fit the design of the airport?
And get approval.
We do have design of this Peraza flooring. Just saying.
So we made a commitment to this, to the Measure J Commission, to the city council. The date was February of 23, and for whatever reasons, we haven't done the work on it, even though we've gone through the process in multiple steps to get here. We have a commitment to climate resilience. It's in every document that I've read, seen, touched in the last year or more in this city. It's to make this a more livable environment for our residents and for our tourists. I think we should take the initial steps that we committed to almost a year ago to make this project real, if it is possible, find out where the boundaries are, where they're not, instead of presuming that it's going to fail. That's essentially what the staff has done. It's clear through this. It's clear from the attempt at the last meeting that that's been the goal. But I think there are other goals of climate resilience and making this a livable place, and making this a welcoming place for our tourists, as well as our residents who use the TNC every day during the heat. And it's not just hot in 4 months of the year under the TNC waiting area. It can be hot in February, January, and March as well. It's not just June, July, August, September.
Today it was 84.
So I would really ask that we adhere to the commitment that we made over a year ago to see if we can accomplish this project.
I do have a correction. It was February 2024, so it was earlier this year.
But earlier this year, and we went to the Measure J Commission when?
Last year.
Last year.
2023, yep.
Yep, because I was asked to go and represent this project because the commission voted on it. And apparently I presented it to Measure J Commission. So there's a long history on this.
I agree. I mean, we talked about this, well, however many months ago. You went to the Measure J commission, they approved it, then it went to city council, so we've done a lot of stuff already. I think we should wait and see what the commission said, the other commission says, and then take it to city council, let them sort it out. We've already approved this. So I agree with you.
And I don't even think we should have a presumption of failure. Peter Morosi sat here at the last meeting and said, I don't have any objection to this. I mean, maybe when he gets into the detail later, I mean, he didn't pledge on a Bible, but he did say that.
So would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion.
I have a question. So was the taxi piece of that in the original agreement?
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Okay, so if that is an issue, I mean, they operated on two separate business models. The taxis generally sitting there waiting for somebody to get into. The Uber and Lyft that I have tried to take, usually I stand around and wait for 15 or 20 minutes for it to show up. So if HSBP has an issue with it, is it possible to look at these as two separate mini projects and let that work itself out with the taxi stand on the north end, which could be an issue, and the Uber Lyft piece operates separately and get that under, because I agree completely, the heat is awful, understanding in the sun, it's something that we should.
It's a good question.
So why do we need a motion? What are we motioning on? We already have an agreement with Measure J.
So you can make a motion to say, I motion to keep it the same as is. We want to proceed with presenting the shade structure to the HSBP board.
So I'd like to make a motion actually. Cause I think that we're being unwise if we do the whole shade structure, including tax component. And I think that, the commissioner's comments about the availability of taxis, it's a pretty low priority. I think that you get out of the airport, you get in a taxi, it's standing right there, you're waiting in the sun many time. But over the far end, you've walked 5 minutes or 10, depending how fast you are in the sun to get to the waiting area. So having shade there, to help will be tremendous benefits. I also think that we have to be conscious of staff resources being limited and wasting time proposing the taxi shade structure to the historic board is inefficient use of staff time. So what I would propose is that we have a motion to propose the Uber Lyft shade structure only, remove the taxi shade structure from our process and figure out the funding mix, how that affects how much gets allocated to the shade structure versus the flooring project.
So I would counter motion, which is the shade structure and the FIS project. Because we've been talking about having international flights here since I was on the board 7 years ago. So
option D.
Option D. I understand the thing about splitting it. I mean, I share your concern about the heat. I share everybody's concern about the heat. That's why I keep talking about a tunnel on the parking garage. And I will continue to talk about it because of the heat. And, but there are times there are no taxis out there and you're standing out there waiting for a taxi to show up. And that's happened to me a couple of times. Particularly this past summer as I was commuting back and forth to DC. So
let's be clear. If we're going to support state structure, what we're saying to staff is proceed with the analysis and perhaps come up with preliminary design so we know what we're fighting for. And let's see how that goes. I mean, if we have some input in terms of design that somehow complements this building, maybe that's helpful. And then let's see what the feedback is. let's keep it moving, let's keep the process moving. It's gotta go, to David's point, I think it's gotta go beyond where it is now. So we don't know what they would object to because we've never seen any recommendations for designs. So can we just take it to the next step and then see where we wind up?
If we were to get a no from historical, then we could go to D.
Well, no, D does the shade structure. And the leftover money goes to, the FIS project.
Because we have almost $1 million that have not been allocated.
Right.
So when we did our reconciliation for Q3 2024, we had a total of $1 million that we have not allocated for any projects. And so, and then we have 1.2 million for Measure D. So that's, so option D says that yes, we still pursue Uber, Lyft, and taxi shade structure to HSPD. And then we end up allocating the remaining Measure J funds of 1 million and 1.2 million in Measure D funds to the FIS project when that happens in the future. And we can bank that over time, we're gonna get more money, and then there's a, you know, we could decide later on what we're gonna do with it.
So I just wanted to kind of dovetail on Victoria's comment there. So we on the staff had two concerns. The two concerns were the historical, which Nikki spoke to, the historical element of it, and the potential for some costs, given that we were actually phasing other projects and there was a high likelihood that the TNCs would move. Now, we're open to exploring the next steps. We don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that that's on the table is the prudent use of public funds.
Right, real quick, didn't we discuss last meeting that even if we build this big structure, we potentially would have to tear it down?
Yes.
Yeah. But we didn't
know. Are there desirable interim solutions that would provide shade that would not be perhaps aesthetically appealing, but that would accomplish the environmental passenger comfort goals without subjecting us to many sunk costs?
That's a challenging one to answer. So we actually toyed with that a few years ago under Director Geary, when he was here, Ulysses Geary. Part of the challenge that we had, was the impact on the view shed. The other part though was the winds. The winds here caused a problem, so we really have to engineer something to install.
So Victoria, review the cash thing. The terrazzo floor was $1 million, now it's 3.
So we had originally voted for carpet.
Right, I get that, but what was the revised?
And so total, we're saying that terrazzo is coming in about $3 million. And we have already, I think we're at 90%, am I correct, Jeremy, on the terrazzo flooring design?
We'll be bringing that probably in January, probably to the board to take a look at. But yeah, we're estimating around $3 million to do all the trucks.
Because that's a $2 million delta from last time I thought we chatted about this. So we got that at $3 million. We have the shade structure, what number?
Shade structure at 1 million.
1 million, and then we have the FIS.
FIS, we're just trying to allocate whatever funds we can, so we can earmark those when we talk to CBP, we say, hey, we have money.
So we got the cash to do it.
Yeah, so that's part of what CBP wants to see is that we're able to support it. They allocate resources to Palm Springs, we're able to.
Got it.
Isn't the FIS supposed to be self-funding though? I mean, is it always gonna be a subsidized operation, or is the fees that you have for international travel gonna cover the cost of the?
Yeah, so it eventually offsets, depending on how you structure it, it would eventually offset and the user fees would fund it, but without having the service in place already, CBP is gonna wanna see how we're gonna take care of that cost. No matter what.
Assuming there's no airlines that actually want to use it for a period of time.
Correct.
So what's our confidence that airlines are gonna?
Pretty high.
Pretty high.
Pretty quickly?
Pretty quickly.
By demonstrating that we have the financial means to do it, they will be more open to staff it. So right now, we're competing with staff from LAX and from other parts of Southern California, and they have a staffing problem. Right, so before they're gonna allocate staff here, They want to know we got skin in the game. It just helps us move forward this process, which we know is the number one goal of Greater Palm Springs.
So this is we'll build it and they will come. What I'm more worried about is they're gonna demand to make use of this great $3 million that we're putting for the FIS for the next 2 years.
Todd, do you want to talk to that, Todd?
No, I don't know if I can add anything additional that already hasn't been discussed.
The demand, what I was asking about, just which, from your perspective or the Greater Palm Springs perspective, what is the potential demand for international service?
Demand, I mean, the demand is great, right? We know that we could easily, there is tremendous interest in a daily nonstop flight from a Western European location, as well as, 4 to 5 nonstops from south of the border. So there is tremendous interest there.
I think it's more than if we build it. I mean, there's 4 cities I know that are interested in this. So, the FIS is sexy, and there's no doubt that if in fact you thought the money would move the needle, that's a very persuasive investment.
So clarifying question, Barry, the shade structure, so are you saying that if we build that Uber left one, is the road potentially going to be reconfigured, and therefore that would be?
So before we had this shade structure discussion, one of our primary missions was to improve safety on the access roads out here, and to basically optimize and create better throughput. And one of the ways to do that was to get the taxis and the Uber and Lyft off this outer lane and turn that into an arrivals or departures lane. So we had been planning for the better part of a year on moving TNC somewhere else on the airport, and that was the challenge of the work.
But that physical location, where this shade structure would go, are you saying it would just be repurposed to some other purpose other than TNC, or would it be like physically removed and the road reconfigured? Are we very?
So long term, medium term, it's likely that the road would be reconfigured.
Okay.
And that's the risk.
Yeah.
And
It's
how
the
many
sunk
years?
cost.
How many years?
I believe that is on the plan for 2028, 2029.
2028, 2029. So we're gonna leave people to roast in an increasingly hot temperature environment until 2028, 2029.
Can I propose a really inexpensive and simple solution? Buckets with branded umbrellas in that area that people can just borrow and use while they're waiting and put back.
The suitcases and stuff that you're not
You're gonna set your suitcase down, you're gonna sit on the bench.
Well, hold on, it seems like there's consensus here to move forward to the next step. So why don't we say yes to the shade structure, and what that means is let's continue the discussion to find out if someone's got a problem with it. But if we have a little muscle into the design, then we can see what we're talking about here. And then we can talk about whether it's 1 or 2 or both or whatever, just let's get that far. And let's revisit this again, we'll have more information. So I think to all of your points, I mean, we spent hours on this. And the fact that this is where we are because none of that work has been done is leaving us in the lurch. I think the feeling is we want shade structures, but we need to find out more. So let's say yes to that. And then we can move to the second decision about what else will we support.
And we can postpone that. We don't have to do anything with the $1 million right now. I mean, we do have a lot of projects already as it is, so maybe that's something that we can just continue to bank. And then we bring it back at a later time. That's also another option.
So
Commissioner Hendrick.
I have a motion on the table if there's a second.
I had one on before you did.
Oh.
Okay, any public comments in the room?
But nobody seconded mine, or.
Can you state your name for the record?
Mary Ann Moriat. On the shade structure, I've been hearing this for a long time also. I appreciate your passion in it, but how many people actually are going to use it compared with the number of people coming to the airport?
How many people, 100% of the people who come to the airport see the dirty carpet? Not everybody uses Uber or Lyft. To this lady's, point, when the sun comes around, there are times you are never gonna be in the shade. You can have that structure standing over you, you are never gonna be in the shade. Walk down towards the RJ terminal during the morning, and you are never in the shade. It doesn't happen. So there's more than just the commitment of saying the shade structure. Why is it so, I shouldn't ask that. You have all these people who, you don't have that many people who can use it. Yet, standing out there for 20 minutes in the sun is bad. But a lot of the companies will say, well, we'll make it in 5 minutes. You're not going to be standing out there. All the people who use Uber and Lyft aren't standing out there for half an hour. So that's why I'm saying.
Any public comments on Zoom? If so, please raise your virtual hand.
All right,
Fred?
Hi, I just have one, which is, I distinctly remember Gerald Ford from Beyond the Grave at the last meeting, asking if we could get some charging on the east side of the airport, we get some charging station. And so I'm channeling him again, if there's a way to leave $100,000. The Air Museum would very much like to put some charging stations in, but they don't take sites without a grant because of the easements required with the lease. So all I ask is that somebody keep their radar up and point us in the right direction, because I think I've been working on this with Measure J probably 5 years and never been able to get any traction, because there is we do need some electric vehicle charging on the east side, whether it's us or the land. Got it.
All right, we have
Public comments are close to a second.
So I have a perspective regarding Measure J's view on this, also the FAA view on this. And I would tell you from my years of being the liaison to Measure J, they would never have approved any capital project that was not expected to be there for the long term. So they would never be pushing for a shade structure that potentially probably will come down. And if it does come down, it probably will be torn down, not relocated, just out of the practical nature of it.
That has to be one of the considerations.
So I think one of the things where Measure J is more willing to be okay with that kind of thing is they've conceded that this is a FAA requirement to earmark these funds generated by basically gasoline sales at the airport for airport projects. So the FAA is also interested in these funds, how they're being spent too. I think how they would be viewing it in consideration of approval of other services where you need their cooperation for providing inspection services for customs, et cetera, would be significant. And that, like you made the point already, the signal that we're really willing to have skin in the game, not just a couple $1 million. I do think, to Commissioner Martin's point, there's probably going to be an ongoing need for a portion of that over time until it starts paying for itself. But, you know, I look at each of these projects, the shade structures, they aren't economic drivers in any manner. And yet the FIS, we just had this presented a month ago. And I thought there's a very compelling set of discussions here. We're talking about potential doubling of our passenger load over the next 20 years. Big part of that is taking advantage of undoing leakage to other airports. Part of that is finding a niche that we're currently really not significantly in. As Todd mentioned, if we can get European flights or more Mexico flights, that's going to be probably pretty quick results we'll be seeing economically.
I don't think there's any question that the FIS will be a huge win for us. We may be able, even if it's temporary, if we're successful in doing this, you know, because who knows how long, as we've all learned, this phase one is gonna take us to build. But if we could find a way to bring international flights, it'd be a huge win for us, for, you know, not only the economy, but tourism and everything else. So, I mean, this is pretty compelling. And we've been, you know, you guys have educated us about, this is a staffing issue with these folks. They just don't want to give up the staff to come to our little airport unless we show them we have the demand and we have the money behind it. So that's a really compelling argument. So we just see if we just summarize again.
Could I just say one other thought? I would urge the commission to consider parsing the recommendation. Maybe approving just the FIS portion and give staff time to, you know, talk to folks and mull this over. What do you want to do with the other $1 million?
Can I just add something here? I don't think, in terms of the investigatory work for the shade structure, I don't think that's a heavy lift. So if you all want us to pursue that, we're happy to pursue that, and at least get the information that we need and the documentation we need while concurrently working on some of these other priorities.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, we just need some more information. And to your earlier point, Jay, we don't want to waste staff time if we're not gonna be able to pull this off. At the same time, what is the probability we're gonna move this structure within the next 7 or 8 years that would make it fiscally unacceptable? We just need to know more, I think. So, between your two proposals, wanna run it by again?
So the proposal now is that we proceed with the FIS and reserve money for a possible shade structure, but that can be allocated elsewhere. Is that what you're asking for?
Subject to more information.
Subject to more information.
But how can we?
Mine was if we just keep it the way it is right now.
I think I agree, because how can we vote for a shade structure knowing we're gonna tear it down?
Yeah, well, we don't know that yet, but if that's the case, that'll be a hard decision to justify.
Yeah. So is that a second to mine?
Recording in progress.
And then come back to us.
And then come back to us.
Hey, keep in mind that we're generating $1 million plus a year, so I don't wanna, I mean, the floor isn't like, I mean, that'll make a lot of people happy in the design world. You know, people are all excited about asking about that, so I don't think we lose that, but future funds could fund that as well. I don't know what we do with shitty carpet between now and then, but it's a really good idea, but I think the benefits, as you propose to the FIS, let's see where it takes us.
Kevin, I'm sorry. For whatever reason, it froze and I did not hear the back and forth conversation just prior to you speaking. Could you summarize? Do we have a motion on the floor?
Can I just make sure I'm clear? So I'm gonna repeat, okay, that this is your motion. Propose the Uber, Lyft and taxi shade structure project to the HSPD and Planning Commission. If the board approves the project, then proceed with the design and construction of the shade structure as depicted in figure 1, which it shows where the shade structures are proposed. And then allocate the remaining Measure J and Measure D funds to the FIS. Is that your motion?
I would alter that, just one respect, Victoria, because I think we're asking for not going to them with the idea, but also proceeding with this, with initial design, so we know what we're talking about, and then take that to them. And so we would have some input on the initial designs as well.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking heavy lifting here, just give us a sense of what it could look like, and then we can take it to them.
So, because that would be proceeding administratively with the, not funding, but administratively to get to a future point for the shade structure, but go with the FIS now.
That's correct.
So we have, in order to proceed administratively, we have to pay somebody to design it. So we need to use we would be still utilizing the 1 million, a portion of the 1 million to design it.
And we have to have an initial design, I think there's.
We can stand garage, the end construction part. Yeah, just those two words. Nothing else, that I think we're okay, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Could we potentially look at this as a carve out proposal here where we're looking at just kind of moving forward with the FIS funds themselves
And then just carving out the rest of it until we potentially reimagine some of these problems that we're trying to solve, because it sounds like there's a lot more to this shade discussion based on.
That's exactly what.
I mean, you know, so I would recommend just carving out whatever you need for FIS today, and then park the rest of it until we get more information, potentially. If that makes sense to the team, I don't know.
I think that's really the spirit of what you said.
Yeah, that's my motion.
But the FAS funding is limited to the 2.1 million.
Yeah, how much do you want to have?
Well, that's the question, how much do we want to carve out for the FIS? Because we might not need all of that.
Well, then, why don't we, what do you need for architects and design, $100,000? $50,000?
What did it cost to design the shade structure?
Well, it wasn't really separated, it was kind of design built, so it was all rolled into one. My,
It's kind of connected.
yeah, but I mean.
Yeah.
So $100,000.
$100,000 to get the answers we need.
So all but $100,000 goes to the FIS. $100,000 is reserved to continue studying this shade project. I guess we need a second for the modification.
What are you needing for the FIS at the moment?
You're still keeping the, you still want the $1 million here.
Yeah, we'll have the $1 million.
It's just, we're gonna use 100,000 of that.
So let me tell you, so utility and operational expenses are estimated between 700 and 1.5 million annually. That is just for operational expenses for FIS, CBT officers. So based off option D, and I like where Commissioner Banks was going with this, because it sounds like it works. Propose the motion would be to propose the Uber Lyft and taxi shade structure project to the HSPB and Planning Commission. If the boards approve the project, then proceed with the design of the shade structure as depicted in figure 1, and then allocate the 2.1 plus of the remaining Measure J, Measure D funds to the FIS project. That's the motion. Does anybody second?
That's not exactly what.
I heard a second and a second.
So I'll make her motion. And then you'll second. Okay.
And Banks will
So I make that motion, because when that motion was just read, it's, to Kevin's point, as it was just read, he couldn't do the design, because it said it has to be approved by the HPSP, whatever it is, before we go to design, because the word design was eliminated as Victoria read it. So Kevin's point was to do the design work, so we have something to look at and to show them, as opposed to just talking about it.
I agree with Commissioner Feltman, that crucial part seems to be missing.
So pretty much we're moving that to the beginning. We proceed with the design and then take it to HSPB and planning.
Thank you.
Okay, got it. So let me start over on the motion. That's okay. Propose the Uber, Lyft, and taxi shade structure project to proceed with the design and then present to the HSPB and Planning Commission. Then allocate 2.1 million, which is $952,962 of the remaining Measure J balance, and $1,203,194 to Measure D.
So I'll modify my motion. That's my motion.
We're at a second. Okay. Any other discussion on this?
I'm gonna take a roll call.
So we're perfectly cool blowing $100,000, and then the historical board says, X, nay, no way, and the city council agrees.
Well, we're not sure. My question to Scott was, who gets to say it's a city council?
Right, but that's.
So just because they say no, doesn't mean we go to city council and say, for all the reasons we've discussed, we want to proceed with this. Because I was thinking if there was some historical thing, it's black or white. If they say no, then it's dead. But that's not what I heard tonight. The council will vote.
But
if we want to fight
we're okay with that $100,000 risk that it may not pass some level of approval.
Yeah, that's the risk. Yeah, that's the risk.
Let's vote. All right, I'll take a roll call. Thanks. Behrman.
Yes.
Burke.
Yes.
Caldwell.
No.
Corcoran,
Yes.
Steiner,
Yes.
Feldman,
Yes.
Fong,
Aye.
Hedrick,
Yes.
Keel,
Yes.
Martin,
No.
McDermott,
Yes.
Hart, Pie,
Yes.
Sans Alaska,
No.
Wise,
No.
Wiseman,
Yes.
and
So all these other things we don't vote on, we voted on that, right?
Yeah.
All right. All right. I know it's getting late, but we're going to vote on Wing Lake part, which is going to be important. Thank you for being with us. Victoria, please, what's the update?
Yeah, let me get to that. All right. So, just a little bit of backstory, Fred Bell and myself, and actually a lot of members on our staff here, honestly, have been working on trying to find a location of where to put this monstrosity of a gigantic winglet. I mean, it is really huge. It's, the base of it is, it's an awesome project though, but the base of it has been the challenge. The height of it has been the challenge. We're talking about over 9 feet in diameter and then, over, or just about 16 feet high. So this is gonna be huge, right? And so originally when we had some spots that we were looking at, you know, we thought that they were good, and then we went back, we measured, and I'm like, oh God, Fred, come out here, because this is not what, it's not gonna fit, like, let's look at it. So we try to get creative with it all, and, ultimately, one, we have to make sure that where we're putting this is gonna be not an operational nightmare, because even though we look busy, once we hit March, you like, January, February, March, tailing off to April, it is going to be so congested. So we need to make sure that where we're putting this winglet is going to be in a good location. So ultimately, we decided, hopefully everything goes well, to put this location, the winglet, in the Agua Caliente Concourse vestibule. So when you're walking through, when you go through the first set of doors to the left there's just enough space for us to be able to put the winglet there. So, and Fred and I have been going through it back and forth, you know, we've had some other spots that, you know, would have been a nice to have, but because of operational concerns, we're like, you know, the best spot is there at the Agua Caliente Concourse. So tonight, we're asking for the commission to recommend to City Council the approval of the display agreement permitting the Palm Springs Air Museum to display and maintain at the expense of the Air Museum, graciously, thank you, a winglet display at the Palm Springs International Airport in a location set forth in Exhibit A. So you can see that in Exhibit A. Does anybody have a, go ahead, Commissioner Hall.
I would call the NSA team approve this. They're not subcommittee, that's something we discussed.
So originally, then that's the thing, look, thank you for bringing that up. So at the last meeting, what we had proposed, that location was not a location that we could even put it there because of the height of it. So we had to come out and look at it again, and that's when we came up with the Agua Caliente vestibule, right before you get there, before it even gets to the activation space. So this doesn't even impact that space anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the airlines? So that's taking space away.
It does not take space away from the airlines, no.
No,
It's in the
gates, but there's a lot of people that's gonna be crowding around there.
Not right there. They're just going, well, they could crowd, that is a fact.
And
They
little
could crowd.
kids are gonna get hit with this thing. It's 10 feet wide.
If their parents are watching, no, I'm just kidding, no, but it is a possibility.
Alright.
Commissioner Whitman.
Can I jump in
Yeah, please do.
So,
Oh, wait, hold on, sorry.
just wondering, wheelchair runners will put their wheelchairs somewhere else?
That is correct.
That's worked out, cool. And then, Commissioner Wise, to your concern about little children, it's not gonna move, so I don't think that should be too terrible.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sorry, Fred, did you want to go ahead and say a few words?
Please.
Commissioner, you're absolutely right. There's a couple of things I saw in the staff report. The unit's not gonna move. It goes in, it's gonna be facing as you come in, if you looked at the unit.
find it here, okay? You would basically be looking at the facing edge of the unit. Like that, I'll walk around here so everybody can see that.
Fred, it is actually in our packet. There's a photo of it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's a little closer. So the idea would be that, if we have to, we'll do the signage along the rail. Really, you only have one way to do this. If you go by, you'll look at it facing, the sign will be around the base. And then if we have to your point, once we get it installed, if you feel there's an issue with any touchy-feely, because we do a lot of exhibit work with the museum, we'll wrap that rail with plexiglass so that there's no way that little hands can get to it. I am not sure though, until we get it installed, we gotta look at it. We're committed to installing it in mid-January. I talked to the president of Aviation Partners today, which is the head of, that's the Boeing joint venture, and he's actually gonna come out for the installation in January. So we'll install it and then kind of evaluate if we have to put up a temporary barrier until we get it in there, but we're gonna need to look at it dimensionally. We're gonna need to look at the signage on the railing on how it makes sense, because what we proposed were 4 signs, one about Joe Clark, one about the Air Museum, one about airport expansion and the history of the airport. So we have to kind of work those in there. And we're only working, instead of a circular design, now we're working on a 180. So we're gonna have to rethink signage. But I think we can do that once we get it in. If anybody's worked with, we use Best Signs in Palm Springs. They're extremely good, and we'll probably bring them out. We have to fabricate sign brackets or whatever, we'll do that. And we can fabricate any barriers, or we build all our exhibits ourselves. We'll fabricate any barriers internally that we need to deal with if we've got crying hands, because we deal with that all the time. Especially with the airplanes, all the things that they can walk into.
All right,
To do that.
Anybody have a motion?
before we have a motion, is there any public comments in the room? We have any
I have
public comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
And maybe this has been discussed earlier. If this is this an actual winglet, Fred?
Yeah.
That was at some point in use?
No.
Okay, so it cannot be placed outside. Was that never an option?
It can be placed outside. Boeing feels that they're, given the temperatures in Palm Springs and the surface temp, that it'll damage the paint that's on the unit. So we talked about that, and I've tried to cajole them to make it go outside, because it'd be a lot easier, but unfortunately, once we started looking at interior spots, they kind of congregated around that, and we are where we are.
And then I noticed in the report that one of the cons was that the doors may continue to open and close. Jeremy, have we solved that problem?
It won't be moving, so there shouldn't be, the concern was with the doors opening and closing, if the unit was spinning, it would trip the sensor, similar to the doors in our facility. We're not gonna have it move. In that area, it makes no sense to have that thing revolving.
Great, thank you.
Fred, what if we put it outside under a shade structure?
We've looked at those, anything here that is tall enough, the report just put in a bunch of shade structures just out. And I went, oh, that would work, but it doesn't. And I think it's pretty cool. You take a look at it, and if it doesn't work, we'll work with you. We'll take it down, I'll throw it somewhere at the museum, but at least we fulfilled the commitment to Boeing to display it. They feel very strongly, because Joe is from this area, Joe Clark is from this area, they would really like it in an airport, because that technology is being used by all the aircraft here.
I need to officially close public comments for this item.
All right, that was the hope that we could move it outside. It doesn't work. This is the only place it's gonna work.
I think there's a consensus, we do that, like, try it, and if Fred, you're willing to make sure it's safe, and do what we have to do to make sure it's safe, I think it's favorable. Any other comments before we vote? And thank you for your patience, I know for all of you, it was hard to problem solve this and get it all done, so.
Thank you to the staff, I'm glad we got it done, right? I know aviation partners is pleased that they're looking at potential install date, so thank you all very much.
Cool. Need a motion, please.
Second.
Well, let's vote.
All right, thanks.
Yes.
Merriman.
Yes.
Berg.
Yes.
Caldwell.
Yes.
Corcoran.
Yes.
Evan Steiner.
Yes.
Feldman.
Yes.
Fong.
Aye.
Hedrick.
Aye.
Teal.
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
McDermott.
Yes.
Hyde. Yes. Sam Lanska.
Yes.
Wise.
No,
Wiseman.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes. All right. The remaining items are staff reports. Considering the time, Barry, should we bang through these quickly? Would that be all right?
I'm pretty sure we can.
Oh, yeah, you have the calendar again, but in terms of marketing, financial, and employment.
I only have one thing to add that's on your packet. I forgot to put in here that we've got word from Allegiant. They're gonna take Bellingham back to year round, starting in 2025, so another year on route. So good news for that. Other than that, I'll just take questions.
I noticed that there's a significant increase in receipts in March and another over in May. Do we know which airlines account for most of those and what destinations those might be?
I haven't got this breakdown on it, but we also we've adding in Frontier and adding in Porter. So we've had two new airlines start last week. This week, Delta starts on United starts tomorrow. Saturday only service on Delta starts to JFK starts on Saturday. We have all those added seats in there. Also looking mainly at March, spring break, we've had capacity for a lot of the airlines. Frontier specifically, they started with 3 weeks for both Denver and San Francisco, but in season, March and April and May, they're actually flexing up and they'll flex down in the summertime. So, and Frontier aircraft, like what they started flying here, the A321 NEOs, they hold 236 people. So just one flight a couple times a week, one plane brings a lot of seats.
Frontier is using 321?
Yep, 321 NEOs. And like, to build on a little bit, and I don't want to play too much, but I will say, looking at some of the fares and just, I know some people maybe aren't thrilled with Frontier being a ULCC, because it's for care. But even if they don't fly Frontier, people are benefiting. I was looking on just google.com/flights, and on Saturday from Denver, Southwest United were $4.99 for a one-way ticket. The very next day on Sunday, they were at $149, because Frontier is operating that day.
Same price, SFO.
So SFO as well.
February.
So the price matching, yeah, so Frontier's making it how possible for people who have been priced out of market to be able to access, the air network. And plus those who may fly Southwest United or Alaska, it's helping them as well as they're benefiting from the price matching, so.
It's great.
So far, it's been great.
That's great. Thank you, Tanya.
Do we have any public comments on site? Yeah,
Sorry.
comment on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand. There's no public comments for this item or closed.
Victoria, highlights?
Highlights is that we are operating in a surplus in our Fund 415 of 2.1 million, which is good given that, it's kind of been like our slow time of the year. We're barely picking up now. But overall, we're in a good position, and in particular comments or questions, I'm willing to take those.
Questions on the financial packet?
Correction, it's 2.6 million in the surplus.
Very good. Public comments on this item? If you have a public comment on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand. We do not have any public comments. Public comments on this item are closed.
Sounds good. Let's move on. Employment update here.
Big change with the employment update is that you should see a lot more presence on the curbside. Our land side division is filling out. We've been able to onboard, I think, 8 people now. So you'll see a lot of presence on the curbside now in the parking lots as we build up the land side division. We are interviewing for innovation strategy manager tomorrow, and that'll be the selection interview. We have made an offer again for the SMS manager. It was turned down again due to salary. We're trying to do some negotiation there and some one-time incentives to get them here, but we'll see where that ends up. And the deputy director of planning and engineering, that position has to reply again, so that's where we are.
Any public comments on this item? If you have a public comment on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand. We do not have any public comments. Public comments for this item are closed.
Andrew.
So in your packet, you have the 2025 commission schedule. I did adjust 2 meetings due to them. So we want to be cognizant of national holidays, religious holidays, and the like. So the April meeting fell in the midst of Passover, so I moved that forward a week. I'm sorry, back a week. And then the December meeting was right in the middle of Hanukkah, so I moved that forward a week. So those are the only 2 changes to the calendar on the typical 3rd week of the month, 3rd Wednesday of the month. You guys have any questions on that? Let me know.
If we're cool with the schedule and we adopt it tonight, then you will populate all of our calendars. So you'll have it locked into your calendars. Calendar invites will be sent to all of us to lock it into our calendars. So any issues with any of the dates?
Do you have any public comments regarding the calendar? Any public comments on Zoom? Please raise your virtual hand. We do not have any public comments. Public comments for this item closed. Do I have a motion to accept?
Wait, can I add something really quickly? So just an FYI, we're gonna have somebody redo this room. We're gonna get better audio, so the people that are online can hear. We're gonna get better ABI, lighting, space, everything. So we're gonna be doing that, after, we're gonna close this room down on March the 8th. And it's gonna stay closed through May 31st. So there's gonna be 3 commission meetings that we are going to have to find alternate locations for.
We just go across the street.
That's what I'm looking for.
Andrew is working diligently on that.
Yeah, I meet with the city staff, city IT staff on Monday to potentially use the large conference room. We just have to make sure, you know, it's gonna work, because they have a like very odd rounded table, and then they have like classroom setting chairs and stuff. So we just need to make sure we can move everything around. Our audio visual is gonna work in there, and it's gonna fit our needs.
It's a funky room, but it's across the street.
It's larger than this room, so I mean, it's gonna fit.
Yeah. All right, do I need to propose?
Yeah, we
this?
need a motion to.
A motion, please. To accept the dates. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Bert?
Yes.
Caldwell?
Yes.
Corcoran?
Yes.
Evanstein?
Yes.
Feldman?
Yes.
Fong? Hedrick?
Yes.
Keel?
Yes.
Martin?
Yeah.
McDermott?
Yes.
Pye? Yes. Sam Lanska?
Yes.
Wise?
Yes.
Wiseman?
Yes.
And Young?
Yes. Terry, capital improvement?
Capital improvement update is in the agenda packet. Are there questions?
Do we have any,
Promise we'll do more of
do
this.
we have any public comments? Any public comments for the room, please raise your virtual hand. We do not have any public comments. Public comments for this item are closed.
Commissioners, comments, today the ad hoc committee, that's focused on the concessions, both retail and charities, the food and beverage had a really productive meeting with folks from. What are they called?
W.H. Smith.
W.H. Smith, they changed their names, the people who do retail. A lot of concerns expressed about, the presence of Palm Springs brands, what happened to that? And inventory control and whatever, and they have been, advised of all of these issues, they're on it, and they've made a commitment to make some changes and report back to all of us. So, there's a big opportunity for improvement, we should start seeing things actually start happening this week. And then I've asked them to come back to the whole commission in February and give a review of all the changes that they've made and the progress they're making. Make sure they deliver on their original promise in the deal. So it was a very productive meeting. Thank you, Victoria, for your help with that. And that happened. Any other issues with commissioners? Anything else, Commissioner?
Just like to share, I'm currently in the Washington DC area where I'll be bringing Visit Greater Palm Springs. Will be bringing a group of journalists, travel agents, meeting planners on tomorrow's inaugural United flight. So it seems like it's going to be in just a few hours at this point, but I'll see some of you tomorrow morning around 11:30 when we land. So there's a tremendous amount of excitement, and it looks like it's a pretty heavily booked flight. So we're excited.
Excellent. Anything else? Thank you for your extraordinary patience tonight. We learned everything we want to know about P freeze. Anyways, thank you for your patience. Have a great holiday. We look forward to seeing you in January. Okay? It's a wrap.